from Foster. Yes, I think he was the council president of Foster.
Okay. Where's Ann? Ann's not here yet.
Oh, here she goes.
Let's go.
Hi, Kathy. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. What about you?
Are you all set, Ann?
Doing great. I'm sorry I'm delayed.
Can't complain.
Neither can I.
Won't do us any good anyway. All right. Ready.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. The chair will entertain a vote to come out of executive session. A motion? Motion. Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries. The chair will entertain a motion to seal the minutes of executive session.
So moved.
Have a second?
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries. Call the order, roll call, town clerk, please.
Kerry McGee,
Here.
Greg LaBoissoniere,
Here.
Deb Bacon. Absent.
Yep.
Gary Cody,
Here.
Ian Dixon,
Here.
Nicholas Gorham,
Here.
Ed Wazika.
Here.
Okay, call the order for the school committee president.
Yes, I'd like to call our open session, our meeting to order. I have 7:06. Roll call, please. Here.
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 Here. Thank you.
Okay, will we all rise for a pledge of allegiance, please, and town sergeant, if you would lead us in that?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for invocation, please. Lord, we ask that you help this council and the representatives and everybody here make sound decisions and work together. We ask you keep everybody in our prayers. Thank you. With that, we bless. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Emergency evacuation plan, town sergeant, please.
Thank you very much. I want to say
Like a Patriots play?
Okay, good evening. and Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. It's a good opportunity to discuss concerns for the town and to have our state delegation that can help address these concerns. I'd like to use this opportunity wisely. This is not a time for political grandstanding. Working on the issues will get everybody all the votes we need. All right. I would like to maintain order, so I will ask that you have one person at a time speak, for everyone's comments are important to everyone. All right. I would also like to keep the meeting moving, as we have 18 points of concern that we want to discuss, and I'd like to be thorough and expeditious. Also, we will not be able to solve the issues tonight, but we will be able to be aware of the concerns and work towards solutions. I will have the council person or the department head explain their concern after I read them. I look forward to a healthy discussion. I would like to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves, so make sure everybody knows everybody. So if we would start over here, please.
Tom Murray, District 25, General Assembly, House of Representatives.
Stuart Packard, State Senate, District 33.
Pat Serpa, State Representatives, District 27, Coventry, Walton, and West Walton.
Sarah Mandarelli, Director of Finance, Coventry Public Schools.
Lori Andrews, Assistant Superintendent of Schools, Coventry.
James Pearson, School Committee Member, District 5, Coventry.
Donna Kalunian, School Committee Member, District 3, Coventry.
Dave Florio, District 4, School Committee Member, Vice Chair of the School Committee.
Kathy Patnode, School Committee Chair, District 2.
Gary Cody, Town Council, District 4.
Ann Dixon, Town Council, District 1.
Kerry McGee, Town Council, District 3.
Greg LaBoissoniere, Council, District 2.
Nick Gorham, Coventry Town Solicitor.
Ed Wazika, Interim Town Manager.
Joanne Amatrano, Town Clerk.
George Nardone, State Representative, District 28, Coventry.
Gotta get the kinks out of the microphones.
Gotta work the kinks out. Mike Chippendale, State
bring the masters
Representative,
down a
District 40, the green portion of Coventry.
State Representative Sherry Roberts, District 29, West Greenwich, Coventry.
Gordon Rogers, Senate 21, State Senate.
Okay, thank you for them introductions. Now that we all know each other, we're gonna get started right away. And the first matter, I'm sorry, yes, I'm sorry. Welcome to the school committee. You have any comments for the, I wasn't paying attention there.
No, let's get this show on the road.
All right. So the first matter of discussion is a discussion of preparation and submission of legislation, example, an act amending the general law 44-5-2, parentheses B, to allow for establishment of separate restricted fund not to exceed $500,000 for appropriations for capital infrastructure improvements, which shall be exempt from the limitations imposed by 44-5-2, parentheses B. That was submitted by Councilman LaBassiniere, and I'll have him give an explanation of his request.
Great. Thank you, Mr. President. I've had discussions with a number of folks on ways that we can address the elephant. We've already addressed one elephant a number of years ago, which was known as our unfunded pensions. And the way you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. That's what I was told at one point in time. And when we started addressing the unfunded pensions in 2013 by ramping them up and getting to 100% of the ARC payments, we were, for instance, the police were funded at that point 9.9%. Well, here we are 6 years later, and we're at 20%. By taking that one bite at a time and really making a commitment to the elephant that we need to face, we have started to address that. It's a long-term situation and a long-term solutions. The elephant I want to talk about tonight is capital funding. Okay. We all know that the meaning of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, we have not funded virtually anything capital needs for town or school in at least 5 years. Okay, there's virtually zero. There was a report called the Jacobs Report, which was a state report regarding, and Kerry, you can pass these down and kind of give people an idea there. Which identified $60 million in needs to address the infrastructure needs of our schools, just the schools and a town, et cetera. It's millions and millions. This past year, the budget that we're in right now is a budget that was virtually at the 4% tax levy increase, which is as high as we can go before having to go to the state for emergency funds or for additional funds to tax the folks. With that, we still have zero added for capital needs. Okay, our buildings and infrastructure is crumbling around us, and we have been either unable to or unwilling to fund these. My proposal is that very shortly, we've been working very diligently on breaking the log jam and getting the Center of New England out of receivership, and the receiver is about ready to do that, and there's going to be some substantial growth there. It's in the very near future. Okay, which I believe that we can utilize that we can utilize as a way to set aside specific funding for our capital needs. Okay, right now the only way that we can add funding, okay, is for capital needs, which realistically would be to drastically reduce personnel and services, to increase the tax levy to higher than 4% and go to the state and ask for additional percentages, and that's an emergency basis every single year. We could sell properties off to put money into capital needs. We could reduce the ARC payments to the pension funds, which are already our obligations that we're doing. We need to find, new revenue, which are non-tax. So we could add fees. We could add charges for different things to come up with money to add to a capital account. I don't believe any of those things are feasible because the people in this town have been taxed and continue to be taxed. I think that the opportunity lies in the future growth at the center of New England, and what will happen on a minimal basis. We'll be adding, or a developer will be adding at least 100 units up there, and which my belief is that in speaking that with our administration is that will provide $500,000 additional just on those units of tax revenue. Under the limitations of the of 44-5, that we would not be able to really put it into the to the capital needs unless we were to go to an emergency, because the way that it is funded, it pushes the tax benefits down, which are individually are very small, but collectively would create a separate fund of $500,000, meaning 100 units at approximately $5,000 a unit. What's the plan, as I've listed in there, what it would require is enabling legislation to separate the increased growth, which is tax dollars that we are not receiving at this point in time from anybody, but on the growth, we could set it aside and look to restrict it to capital needs. I would love to see something that would, enabling legislation that would allow us to separate these funds to the tune of $500,000 for 10 years, which would allow us to put over 10 years $5 million into the capital needs of this town. It's not a cure-all to everything. There's going to have to be a number of different ways to do it, but I think it's an idea that could certainly work for all of the people of the town of Coventry by specifically restricting certain funds to our capital needs. To help the schools and the town infrastructure, and so again, specifically for town infrastructure. I'm not looking to use these funds for vehicles or anything that's depreciable in that nature, but for our school buildings, our town buildings, and all of the capital in that nature. And I would love to work with anybody in the legislature to see if we can write up a bill that could be sponsored by many of the people in Coventry to help us to fund our future capital needs.
Does anybody have any comments, any questions, legislators, perhaps?
I got a question. Now, this is specifically for the center of New England, a specific parcel in the center of New England.
That's the idea, because I think that's where the growth is going to happen again as soon as the receivership has been completed, which we've been told that the judge says it's going to happen this year. So I think that the time,
So I just want to make sure that everyone in the delegation knows that this is going to be specifically in the enabling legislation that you're going to request. It's going to specifically give the location, so it's not going to be used somewhere else in Western Coventry or somewhere else.
No, not at all. Okay. Specifically in that area of growth, and the reason I picked this, I've got some reasons listed in my little flyer there, and one of them is the fact that that center of New England was supposed to be a boon financially for the town, which it's been a long time coming, and it's been in limbo for quite some time. And this is a way that we can identify those funds, new funds to the town in a different area. It's its own zone business park.
And the legislation is going to be the responsibility of the town of Coventry, not any member of the General Assembly.
Right.
Okay. I want to make sure that's clear, because in the past we've had issues where we're to blame for something that we introduced on your behalf.
No.
So I want to make crystal clear that doesn't happen again in the future.
This is something, and again, it's any funds derived from there are the people's money. By directing that into a restricted fund that could be used each year for capital needs in this town, which, like you said, we haven't had a good history of funding capital needs in this town.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, if I may?
Yes.
Thank you. If folks saw me looking on my phone, I wasn't playing Tetris. I was actually looking up the general laws. I have them right here. So when it references the laws, sometimes it's helpful to have the underlying language handy. This section that's being cited here is for those, exactly that, special occasions. It's in the max levy, if you will, section of the law. So it would be a specific carve-out, which typically, and I'll just echo, I think, what Senator Rep. Tackett said, an enabling resolution from the council would be sufficient for us to put that in.
Okay.
Very easy to do.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. President, I just, one quick question. When this enabling legislation gets passed, I'm not familiar with your charter. Does it have to go to voter approval, or is it approval from the council at this point to move forward, once it's approved from us, allowing you to do it?
The town council can give a resolution to the General Assembly to make a law, but the General Assembly is the supreme lawmaking body of the state, so there wouldn't be an issue with our charter.
Well, the question I have is, sometimes we'll allow enabling legislation and then it still has to go on the ballot for voter approval. This wouldn't have to. It would be able to be done through the constraints of the town leaders.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Just a quick one. Representative Chippendale, you had said just a resolution, but I'm thinking, this is not just for Representative Chippendale, but for anybody. Do you think that such a carve-out would be better if it were just for Coventry or more general? Because, that's always a strategy question when you submit legislation. The first words you might hear out of the leadership's mouth is, oh my gosh, if we put Coventry in the pipeline, they're going to have a long line behind them. So maybe, and you don't want to have that as a reservation. Maybe considering doing it in general. I mean, it does encourage capital improvement, or it just puts the incentive back into capital improvement that many contend the Piva Weed Bill 3050, which is now codified at 4452, took out of the fiscal process for cities, towns, and schools.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, Mr. Gorham. That would just need to be reflected in the resolution from the council. As you're well aware, when we bring a town-specific issue in the form of legislation to the body, it's usually received a little bit more openly, especially if it's along the lines of aid and helping a town out of a jam. Doing something statewide is a little more tricky because everyone's going to want to have a part of that conversation. But we can put it in however it's introduced.
I personally agree with Rep. Chippendale that I would prefer to make it Coventry specific because I think it's less mucky, for lack of another word, and you might have some objections from other cities and towns. So, Mike, I don't know about you. I'm thinking Coventry specific. My opinion.
Yes.
And I have a question that actually goes more to the root of this issue. So you're looking at putting, in my background being a police officer from this town, you're looking at putting 100 residential units in the bottom of that area, which partially the road in and out. One half is West Greenwich, one half is Coventry. The road's atrocious that is presently there, and it's privately owned. So it's probably looking at about $500,000 to repave that road. Would that road come out of the person that's buying the property to repave that road, or would that come out of the first $500,000?
Well, no. Part of the agreements that we've had made or have made with the receiver, they will handle that part of the road. That will be done by the owners of the park. Okay. The additional growth taxes, actually they're going to be on the other side where they're located, but eventually that whole road will be connected through according to the agreements, and that will be handled with monies that the receiver has through their association.
Perfect.
The infrastructure, yeah, that any of those dollars would be derived for the rest of the town, not the center of New England.
Okay,
And
thank you.
that road is atrocious, and it part of the deal with the receiver is to, like you said, get it repaired and not come out of what he's asking for. So you had something to say?
Yeah, I just for explanation,
because when Lou asked, when Senator Reptakis asked the question, I was a little confused by not only his question, but the answer. So we're talking about carving out this fund from just the future development in the center of New England, but the fund would be available to be spent anywhere in the town of Coventry that a capital improvement project needs to take place.
That's correct, and I certainly will want to allocate a share to, that we could make it specific, a certain allocation to the school's capital needs, the town's capital needs, all of the above.
We certainly are trying to think out of the box of these capital needs. He had mentioned before about we're looking into probably selling some of the properties we have. We really got to come up with something because we're going to be forced to come up with capital, and it's been neglected for so many years due to all the other situations we've had to take care of. But we certainly are going to be working on being able to fund this capital. So, is there any other questions concerning question 1? Yes, please.
Thank you. So I just want to double check. That road is going to, for the center of England, that's going to stay private?
Yes.
Okay. And if you're going to put more houses in there, there's probably, I guess the concern is the garbage removal and the snow removal.
Well, the condominium units are what's going to go in there with some of the associations that are already involved with there. So, and that's part of the beauty of that development is that it's going to require a minimum of additional town services. With that, so that's where the town can benefit from the growth in that area without additional costs and expenses to the town services.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I'd like to move on to question number 2, and it's discussion on the impact of any legislation submitted pertaining to the town of Coventry and or the school department. That was submitted by Councilperson Bacon, and just to mention that she is very ill this evening. She had to call us and let us know that she was not able to make it. So I think Councilwoman Dixon will speak on her behalf on her questions.
Thank you very much. I did speak with Councilwoman Bacon this afternoon, and she was very interested in having these 2 items presented this evening. She just wants an update on any kind of legislation any of our senators or representatives have submitted on behalf of Coventry that have some impact on Coventry. So I'm wondering if anyone could speak to that.
Okay.
Councilwoman Dixon, I'm not familiar of any legislation relating to education that's been submitted other than suicide training and the depression and the recognition of depression to be taught in phys ed classes.
Okay.
That's the only piece of education legislation I'm familiar with.
Okay,
so
thank
far.
you. Thank you for that update.
Yeah, as of yet, we still have not finalized the deadline. I think it's about another 3 weeks, so you're going to get at least quite a bit of legislation being introduced by both the House and Senate in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we can update you. Sometimes a statewide bill will have an impact on a city, a town, indirectly, but more directly. So until we finalize the drop date for introducing legislation, we can try to give that to you at a later date.
That would be excellent. I mean, we just need really an update on what's being submitted that has any kind of impact on Coventry town itself or the schools. So how do we get that information?
Well, usually the cities and towns usually have
The league.
Yeah, the league, I'm sorry. The league usually takes any bill that pertains to any city or town throughout the state of Rhode Island, and they usually have an agenda or a set of legislation that they are going to notify specifically every city and town. For example, if there's a bill that caps the loss of state aid, I remember last year S2371 said that any city or town that received, say, $20 million for fiscal 2018 could not receive any less fiscal 2019. So that held harmless any city or town for losing any aid, whatever the governor submits. You would be notified by the League of Cities and Towns on that bill, whether it has a positive impact or a negative impact.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may,
Yes.
we have not. We in the House Republican Caucus, of which there are 3 of us here, haven't introduced anything specific to Coventry yet, Councilwoman Dixon. We do have some things in the pipeline that are more appropriate to be discussed when they themselves come up on the agenda. So I think maybe we can do that. But it's fair to point out that just about anything we do up there can impact this city and this town rather. And there are certainly a lot of things that I see in the pipeline, and I will chime in when I think it's appropriate on here. Regardless of whether the League of Cities and Towns takes a position on it, that I think could be potentially harmful to municipalities. So I'll chime in when appropriate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have a comment, Mr.
Yeah,
Rogers?
there is something in the governor's budget does pertain to cities and towns. I've already talked to my other 3 towns. I haven't got a chance to get to Coventry. I was going to use tonight's opportunity for that. They're going to be putting through the Department of the DMV. Whenever somebody puts a town puts a stop for failure to pay for taxes, they'll stop a registration. There's going to be a $5 fee levied to the town, so you might want to be prepared for that in your budget. And when you do your referendum, make it so the person that's actually doing it is responsible for the $5 fee, because that can add up to several thousands of dollars.
All right, thanks for that.
In our case, it would actually be more, about $150,000.
Right. You're correct. So I, like with Force, what we do is when we do the referendum at the end of the resolution that everybody pays 13% on anything paid late, you add that into it on your enforcer. That's what they're going to do to cover it instead of the town being responsible
What
for
about
it.
all the ones that never come back and get cleared? The ones that sit there, we pay the money out, we're never gonna get a chance to get them because they're not gonna re-register them. So we're out the door. I think the numbers that we were looking at were about half of the ones that we put on never come back. So that's money that we're never gonna be able to recoup. Again, another unfunded mandate that we're gonna have to deal with in a trying budget period to begin with.
I will say you got an asset when me up in the State House working and running the town of Forster. It ain't as big as Coventry, but it's still pretty much the same thing. It hits them, it hits us. And I picked up on that immediately. So I'm certainly going to be speaking against that specifically, because I know that is one of those unfunded mandates that I used to get hit with all the time. And there was nobody up there that would actually read into the weeds and see what the impact was on the cities and towns. So I'm definitely watching that stuff up there. And that's why I brought that up tonight. That's actually in her budget. And it's one of the first things that stuck out to me. And I took tonight's opportunity. Like I said, I spoke to my other 3 towns and to get a game plan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Senator Rogers. Yes?
It should be pointed out, this is all predicated if the budget passes.
Correct.
It's not had to do going up and out.
Okay, are there any other comments concerning this? If not, we'll move on to question or comment number 3, and that is discussion on any sewer legislation pertaining to the town of Coventry being proposed or submitted. That also was submitted by Councilperson Bacon, and if you want to comment on that.
That's
it's
pretty
self-
self-explanatory. Yeah, it's just an update on, has there been any kind of legislation relating to the sewers system on our behalf?
Mr. Cody, you have a comment you want to say?
Well, yeah, I'm glad this is on the agenda, because I just want to let people know that myself and Senator Reptakis have been working together, and we're working in conjunction with Sheldon Whitehouse's office in Rhode Island, but through their connections in Washington, D.C., to try to come up with federal money to infuse into the sewer project, in the town of Coventry, to help bring it solvent and for future development of that sewer system. I have to tell you that I'm a firm believer in a sanitary sewer system for the town of Coventry. I'm not a firm believer in putting it in residential neighborhoods and sending out $20,000 or $25,000 sewer assessments. So working in conjunction with Senator Reptakis, we were able to contact, through Senator Reptakis, we were able to contact Senator Whitehouse's office, and we did a conference call, and we're attacking it on 2 or 3 different levels. We talked about expanding the sewer line on Tyoke Avenue in a commercial district from where it currently ends on Tyoke Avenue, which is approximately Coventry Credit Union, Cumberland Farms area, and continuing that out to the West Greenwich line. And we were trying to find federal funds to do that. 3 different things. First of all, it would infuse money into the sewer project into the town of Coventry. Second of all, it would open up a lot of property that is already zoned commercial for development. It makes it easier to entice new businesses into the town of Coventry if you can provide them with a sanitary sewer system. Thirdly, as Senator Reptakis pointed out, Tyoke Avenue in that area runs by 85% of the wellheads that Kent County Water pumps their water out of for the Kent County Water Authority. So we're going at it from a public safety standpoint by protecting public drinking water. I want people to know that the town council, in conjunction with the sewer subcommittee, I had a meeting with the chairman of the sewer subcommittee Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, and he's currently working on an overview of that project, so we'll have something to send over to Karen in Senator Whitehouse's office so they can continue exploring, trying to find some of that federal money for Coventry to bring that in, to try to take some of the responsibility off the backs of the residential taxpayers. So that project is by the wayside for the time being, but a solution to that project and that problem is being worked on a daily basis by myself, the chairman of the sewer subcommittee, and thankfully Senator Raptakis in his connections in D.C. So I want the people to know that we are currently working on that and trying to come up with a solution to make it more tolerable for the taxpayers in the town of Coventry, but to be able to continue that sanitary sewer system and bring Coventry into the next century. So that's all I have to say about that.
All right,
Thank you.
Mr. Cody.
And,
Anybody else have any comments on
If I may, there is also, we are expecting probably within the next 3 weeks, maybe a month, is Dennis Hoyle's report. That's the audit on the Coventry Sewer Program, which it's almost a year now that the members of the General Assembly signed a letter to the Auditor General. So I'm hoping, I know you've received the Citron Cooperman report several months ago, but the Auditor General of the state of Rhode Island, his duty is to report back to the Speaker of the House and the Senate President with this report that was paid by the taxpayers of the state. So it should give us some type of vision where we're heading on the sewer program in Coventry. But I also spoke to Councilman Cody that I think it's about time that we have a sewer summit, a summit that we bring everyone, payers, members of the General Assembly, the Town Council, and all stakeholders to start discussing this. I know this is limited time this evening, but it's really going to take some time that we bring everybody together and let everybody, the residents, ask serious questions and get some serious answers. And I think that should happen, and that would be the call of the council to decide that along with the sewer subcommittee. So that is going to be probably something very important that we should maybe look at maybe within the next 30 days to create a sewer summit and invite everyone to participate and have their opinions known and their questions answered. And I believe there is one bill that Senator Rogers and I did introduce last week, the only bill of the sewer package, because we're waiting to see what the Auditor General is, the one that caps, and I think that was one agreement, hopefully, that we can agree on, that caps the rate, meaning that when the town of Coventry or any town receives money from the infrastructure bank, let's give an example, 4%, and Warwick did pass this legislation, they would only allow to charge interest 4% plus maybe a small monetary amount, 0.25% for administrative fees, which is fair. You borrow the money from an infrastructure bank, and then if you're going to allow the residents to borrow that money, it should be almost the same rate with an additional small fee. So it is law. The city of Warwick did pass a state statute that allows the city of Warwick to do that. So that's another issue that we should discuss during this summit.
Along those same lines, Senator, I want you to know, and I want everybody to know, that I've had this discussion with the president of the council about the interest rate that the town of Coventry is currently charging. And I didn't discuss 0.25%, but I did discuss a half a percent.
Example.
Administratively, because the town of Coventry is going to administer those loans on currently what the term of them are now is 20 years. So the town of Coventry is going to administer those loans for the next 20 years. I thought 0.5% was fair, but you're absolutely right that under no circumstances should the town of Coventry pay revenue for anything except that sewer fund and support that sewer program. The last time I was on the council in 2010 to 2014, the interest rate at that time was 8% is what the town was charging. Through our leadership, myself and Mr. McGee were successful at getting the council to drop that down to 6%, which is currently where it's at right now. I don't have exact figures, but I think we're borrowing the money from the infrastructure bank currently at about 2 3%. So if the town of Coventry was going to continue to fund sewer assessments at 3.5%, that would be much more fair and I believe much more acceptable to the taxpayers in the town of Coventry than 6% would be that is currently being charged.
Right, and the bill states that clearly. It states that excess of those interest charges actually paid by the town for funds it has borrowed for sewage work purposes. So it doesn't say a specific percentage, but it says it's clearly going to be, if it's 3%, then it should be 3.25% or 3.5%. So basically, when you're ready to let us know what that percentage is going to be, an agreed percentage with all the stakeholders, we would amend this bill to make sure it's properly.
Is that bill going to be town-specific to Coventry, or is that going to be statewide?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. No, it's a Coventry bill. It's identical to the bill that the city of Warwick passed for its sewer ratepayers, which they thought it was fair. I think they were charged maybe 0.5 percentage point or maybe 3/4. But I did speak to the mayor of Warwick and also to Councilman Joe Solomon, who's going to be the new chairman of the Municipal Government Affairs Committee in the House, which all this legislation is going to go up in front of him.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, absolutely.
I just want to mention that I constantly send Mr. Hoyle emails. I've been sending him emails once a week to remind him we want this report. And as of last week, he said we would get it this week. Whether we get it this week or not, I do not know, but he promised it this week.
I would love to see us on question 3. I would love to see us be able to get into something like the Narragansett Bay Commission, where the town, Providence, Pawtucket, and a few of them cities are involved in a Bay Commission that helps and funds their sewer. I'd like to see something, maybe a West Bay Sewer Commission, or maybe we can be part of Narragansett Bay. I think I've talked to the town manager, and he's currently looking into it, and I don't know if that requires, anything to do with the state legislation, but that would be great if we could get into some kind of a program like that. So we're actually looking into it as we speak, so. All right, if there's no other.
I just have one quick thing, Mr. President, if I may. Lou, the 3 reps on this side are unfamiliar with that piece of legislation. Do you have a co-sponsor on the House side?
Usually Representative Serpa will be the co-sponsor on the House side, like she did last year with all the
just making sure that there's 2 bills. Thank you.
Yeah, we were unfamiliar with it. It was first we heard about it ourselves. So, all right. Question number 4, discussion of what are the top priorities each of the legislators have relating to help in Coventry, and that was submitted by Council President Dixon.
My rationale for this is that there are 8 representatives and senators, each representing a portion of Coventry, and I know you all have other districts and towns to represent, and I want to make sure that Coventry doesn't get lost in the battle for other things that some of your other towns and cities do want from you. So I'm interested in knowing what are some of the priorities that you have set that specifically relate to Coventry.
Okay, I guess I'll start them down at the end.
Absolutely.
Again, like I mentioned earlier, what I bring to the table, we all bring different things to the table as running a town and understanding how municipalities work and working with councils to get what you want approved and understanding it, and also understanding budgets and knowing almost right away where an unfunded mandate's going to come back and hit you. So that's my asset to the town. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Dixon?
Yes.
I was going to say, I sent you a budget report from the governor's office. Now, when you say what we bring to Coventry, the governor's proposal of this year has given Coventry $2.1 million in excess of 2019 that was enacted. So I'm not sure if you received that. So that's a positive issue, how we're going to vote on the budget. There's some things of state aid to education. It's going to be a positive 2.1. Council president and also to the superintendent of schools. So that's very good news for the town of Coventry. Again, last year and the year before, I think we were scaled back somewhat. Yes. But if the numbers are correct and if they do get approved by the negotiating parties of the House Finance Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, Coventry is going to be increased from $25,500,000 to $27,750,000. So that's a good start.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments?
Certainly, representing more rural districts makes us more keenly aware of the impact on the towns that we represent. The 2 other members that I serve with in the minority office, we do first and foremost look out for the impact on the cities and towns when any piece of legislation is submitted, because oftentimes the cookie cutter approach taken, where it may work well for a Woonsocket or a Providence or Westerly, it just doesn't really work necessarily in a Foster or West Greenwich Coventry setting. So through not just our votes, but also our conversations as stakeholders with legislation, we are very municipal minded, because we deal with on the town level as taxpayers in town the direct impact that goes to the homeowners. So generally speaking, you're going to always have friends in the Republican caucus as far as reducing burdens on the towns, and that goes across the board.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all we have. We'll move on to question 5, discussion of what can our town council do to support the schools in their efforts to get the school funding formula changed? Who at the Rhode Island Assembly is passionate about change, and how do we influence them? That was also submitted by Council President Dixon.
So my question is, how can we as a town council be very proactive in supporting any kind of legislation, influencing other legislators, so that we can have a good, solid discussion about the formula that is used for funding our schools? And that has been a perpetual problem. That subject has hit the news recently, but I'm new at this job, but I don't really understand what we can do to have an impact, and who are the key passionate legislators that we need to be working with to influence.
I can answer that, Councilwoman.
Yes.
Last year, I know on the House side, it was Representative Greg Amore from East Providence, and on the Senate side, it was Senator Ryan Pearson from Cumberland, who kind of took the lead on the school funding formula. They had a commission that went to an expiration date. So in fact, I texted Representative Amore today, and I said, is that commission ongoing? And his response was, the commission has not been recommissioned. We have a bill in to repopulate and reinstitute, and they are going to look at the funding formula. So those are your key contacts, Amore in the House and Pearson in the Senate.
Okay, could you help us track that as to what's happening?
Sure.
And send us some regular updates? That would be very, very helpful to us.
Sure.
Because if there's any action that we can take proactively, we'd be happy to do so, but we need to know the key people and the timing of that response.
Okay, great.
Mr. May I just add a little bit to that? And actually, Senator Reptakis, I'm glad that you brought up our projected state aid for next year. Just to clarify, that enrollment or that figure is based on the March 1st, 2018 enrollment. As of October 1st, it is down. So I am projecting about $150,000 less than what's currently been reported just based on current enrollment. But I think that this is a perfect example as to why we need to look at the funding formula. If you look at the past 3 years, there's been significant swings in communities across the state. Coventry received a reduction last year. We have an increase this year. It wouldn't surprise us based on the trend that we receive a decrease next year. So the component that's missing is a maintenance of effort component on the state side. So local communities cannot appropriate less than they did in a previous fiscal year. Unfortunately, on the state education side, that doesn't exist. So several communities around the state are experiencing that fluctuation, and that's very difficult when you're entering into multi-year contracts, whether it be with your unions or your vendors. So this was brought up last year at the same meeting, and I hope that it can get some traction. I'd be more than interested to be a part of any commission, but this is absolutely something that needs to be on the forefront.
Well, that's why I introduced the same bill last year and the year before, S2371, and you can look it up if you Google 2018. That holds harmless. That's very important. I wish we had this into law, because then we wouldn't receive less. And then when it's time to do the budget, especially the school committee, you would know exactly what your number was, and you know you're not going to get less from the previous year. So I've been fighting for that bill, and I'm not sure who's could put it on the House side. But it makes a lot of sense, not just to Coventry, but a lot of cities and towns throughout the state, and it should be a state law. I mean, the state of Rhode Island and the General Assembly should be making sure not to, I mean, it's ridiculous to, like you said, last year we received less. The other component I just want to ask, was it also, I believe, last year, the year before, was it counting children, certain needs children, like the populace of those that need specific needs. I'm not sure. I think there was an undercount, and they said to recount the numbers again. So I think that in the formula, that would give Coventry a bonus for those children. Were they not counted? I remember one year we had an issue where the Department of Education came back and said, well, you didn't count, you didn't give us the proper count, or they were less than last year. Does that have an effect also?
With the school
Right.
lunches, they
Right.
deducted,
There
they
you
had the
go.
budget all set, and then they turn around and cut out like $400,000
Correct.
at the last minute.
That happened 2 fiscal years ago. So we have done a lot around data digging to make sure that we're properly identifying students who are either free or reduced, and also looking at special needs costs. That is a special calculator that we do in the spring that does roll into our state education aid. So I would say probably 3 to 5 years back, there was some room for cleanup of proper data on the school side. I think that we have a pretty good handle on it now, especially because at this point, every student's identification really matters.
I mean, from a town side, because it runs downhill, we kind of get it twice. The state law says we have to meet maintenance of effort. As a council, we all understand that. The governor, who is very pro-education, and I applaud that part of her service to the state, but she comes up with these unfunded mandates, or she funds them for the first year, and in the second year, that funding formula dries up, and it's up to the taxpayers to now fund that basically unfunded mandate from the year before, like all-day K. We all universally believe in all-day K. We know the advantages in education of all-day K. The first year she instituted it, she gave us $750,000 towards instituting all-day K. The second year, that funding formula dried up, and it was left on the back of the taxpayers, on top of maintenance of effort to the school department, which they're entitled to. Not only entitled to, but that's the law. So the town gets hit with a double whammy. Now she's talking about all-day pre-K, universal pre-K. What's next? Universal daycare? The school system's going to have to provide daycare from newborn up until 12th grade? It's easy to put these unfunded mandates in place, but it makes it hard as a council who has to set a budget for the taxpayers. It makes it hard for the taxpayers to be able to meet that obligation when these unfunded mandates keep coming down. And listen, introduce the bill, maintenance of effort on a state level when it comes to education. I can get behind that. I'll go carry a sign. I'll go holler in the rotunda. I'll go do whatever it takes because I support education, but not at the cost of taxing taxpayers out of their homes because of unfunded mandates that keep coming down out of the State House.
Mr. Cody, Senator Rogers, you have a comment?
Yeah, I definitely have something to say about this. This, sitting where you are, the unintended consequences, unfortunately, that happen when they do this is it almost pits school committees against town councils.
Absolutely.
And I've sat there many times, and you got to weigh in the cost of pushing the issue to the point where the school won't fight it and you'll lose up against RIDE. So this is, again, something that's in my wheelhouse that I've dealt with. I've actually dealt with it with Sarah for many years. There's many people around this roundtable I've worked with over the last 15, 20 years. So sitting there, I know why they did it, and I know why the schools won't go below zero, but it literally pits the committees against the councils, and that's the opposite of what it should be doing. We have to work together, and this type of stuff actually throws the wedge in between you, and it's got to be addressed and it's got to be fixed. So
it is so difficult to set the budgets up, and with that, it really is.
And most of the taxpayers don't understand it,
No, they
and they
don't.
shouldn't. But once you sit in the seat and you balance a budget and you have to work with a school committee, it comes abundantly clear where the problems are. So, and that is one key problem.
Ultimately, it's taxpayer dollar, but
Yep.
it's still, it's a tough issue that we have to deal with every time. Yes, Representative Zemple.
Council President, I understand what Councilman Cody is getting at in terms of that pre-K. I'm a retired teacher, and I certainly respect that. But I have expressed my concerns to both the chairman of the House Finance Committee and to the Speaker. Number one, the cost, that's one part of it. And number two, do the buildings have the physical space for it? I remember when the title programs came into being in my time, we had to purchase a bunch of trailers, and there were some trailers on all of the school properties. So I don't think putting our little kids in trailers is awfully healthy. So I think there's a lot of concern about that pre-K.
Okay, thank you. Any other, yes,
I just wanted to say one more comment about the bill for the maintenance of effort on the state side, I mean, on the state aid. I don't think that's gonna pass. What I think might have a snowball's chance, and hell, quite frankly, would be something that would address the fluctuation, and that the fluctuation can only be within a certain percentage. Because when you go from a cut of $700,000 to 1.8 more, and we're not the only town. You can look all the way down through all the cities and towns. One year, it's a difference of $1 million. The next year, they're cut by $1 million. The next year, it's, so there should, I get the fact that the state's not gonna say or guarantee in the legislation, probably the GA is not gonna guarantee that the maintenance effort should stay the same. You can't get anything less. But certainly, there should be a swing to it. So you can only decrease it or increase it by a certain amount of money. Because it's the big swings that are so hurtful and detrimental to budgeting. Because if it's a maintenance of effort, what if you happen to be on the bad side? You know, because the funding formula has to be re-examined anyway, period. But then above and beyond that, I think there should be some kind of value that you can't swing the way it's been swinging. It's just way too much.
I'll be happy to communicate that to Representative Amori tomorrow. In fact,
Okay.
I just wrote myself a note. Maybe he can consider that as part of this study commission that he will be co-chairing with Senator Pearson. I just made myself a
All
note.
right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comments on that? Just, one, I'm sorry, you have something? No, okay. Just, before we go on to number 6, we were discussing the sewers on number 3, and we did check, and Warwick Sewer charges 1.25% over the cost of what they get the money at. And I don't know currently what we're getting the money at, but if it's 3, 4, whatever it is, but that is what Warwick Sewer is. It's not 0.25%, it's 1.25%. All right, now we get that cleared. Number 6 would be discussion on what support can our legislators get in the Rhode Island General Assembly for tighter controls on alternative power sources such as wind turbines and solar farms, especially controls over, number 1, the impact studies before approvals are given for the alternative power sources, and number 2, fiscal relief in management for dismantling alternative power sources when their life cycle is completed or determined to be unfit for inappropriate to continue to function. That was also submitted by Councilperson Dixon.
Thank you.
You would like to give an explanation?
Yes, there's a proliferation of solar farms, wind turbines, not only in Coventry, but also in the entire state. And I'm concerned about what kind of legislation we might be able to enact that would give us some controls over doing impact studies before any of these alternative sources are implemented. For example, impact studies on humans specifically. And I'm also interested in when these alternative sources reach their life cycle, is there any kind of legislation that provides some kind of funding so that you can dismantle these things or deal with any kind of chemical problems relating to solar farms, et cetera? It just seems that they go up. No, not a great deal is done with impact studies, and not a great deal of thought is given to what happens when it's all done.
Yes.
Yes, Rep. Chippendale.
Right now, we're working with the Farm Bureau. I've been working with the Farm Bureau along with Representative Nardone and Roberts to put in place a system. And I think you and I, Councilman Dixon, we spoke about this. Okay. So we're working on legislation that will require, when these projects are approved in a municipality, that the party that has applied for the permit to do this would be required to contribute to a restricted receipt account that the town controls and maintains. And they would contribute over a 20-year period. And we use the term 20-year because that's the generally accepted life cycle for any sort of a solar array. And I do not use the term farm intentionally. It's an insult to farmers. When those photovoltaic arrays are done with their life cycle, the town will have, at that point, monies in the restricted receipt account that they couldn't use for anything else except cleaning up those particular sites. Again, This is the first year that this legislation has even been spoken about. The Farm Bureau has been very active with this. It's extremely complicated, but it's also extremely important because, as you point out, there are unintended consequences. The siting has been a huge issue for all renewal projects. As many folks in this town are painfully aware, at the threshold of this new renewable age, there was a rush of federal subsidies and contractors who were just putting up windmills and solar arrays on any property where somebody would sign on the dotted line. And unfortunately, towns, municipalities, their planning boards hadn't even had time to consider the impact of these projects. So their documents were silent on the topic of 420-foot windmills and 100 acres of clear-cut forest with solar arrays on them. So we truly are, as a government, playing catch-up with that industry. They got way ahead of, certainly the town of Coventry knows that, and other towns do as well. We're seeing it right now in Johnston with the windmills and Cranston. So the Siting Act is almost perfected. The Office of Energy Resources has been working on that. There is a delegate from Coventry who has been working with them on the siting compact. It was offered last year as a guideline to towns. So in other words, this is what we're trying to accomplish legislatively, but we encourage you as a town to adopt these things into your planning and zoning to help facilitate a more harmonious relationship with those types of installations. That is not law yet. We've only suggested it. Hopefully it will be law this year.
All right, just to say, we do have,
It's actually in the packet. You do reference it in the packet. It's item, it says agenda item C7, the siting of solar energy generation facilities. And so you do mention that the Office of Energy Resources is involved with specifically dealing with the siting of these things. So that's the legislation of which I speak. That's being worked on.
okay, we do have in our ordinances with the wind turbines, we have money set aside to decommission them at the end of their lifetime, so we do have that.
We do.
Yes, we do. Yep.
Is that happening?
Well, they just went up, so, I mean, they do have money set aside, and I don't know, I don't know how it's set up. Mr. Manager, you might know.
We just received a piece on this this past week. And the Lewis Farm Road one, which is an acre of a megawatt plus, a substantial size over there. The funds that are going to be set aside at this point to do the decommissioning amount to $9,200, I think was the exact number. $9,200. That's it. That is nowhere near sufficient to take this down if we are forced to, in the end, if they fail to do their due diligence. It's a ridiculous amount of money that we may be forced to eat in the event that this doesn't. So we need to make some changes in that law to ensure that we're covered.
Yeah, Senator Rogers, you have something?
Yeah, I think this actually, the key to this is your local planning and so on. You got to be careful with a double-edged sword asking the state to do stuff because we just talked about maintenance of effort. It ties your hands either way. We ran into this, and Mike was pretty much hitting it on the nail on the head. It's new to us, new to cities and towns, and as we started doing it in my town, being involved, they started doing performance bonds. And then we said, well, somebody brought up the point of performance bond may not be enough 20 years from now. So we put it in our ordinance that the performance bond would be done by the contractor putting it in or the entity putting it in, and we would require them to have a third nonpartisan one to come up to make sure that number they're actually given isn't a number like that. And then we require them to be relooked at every 3 years or every 5 years to be adjusted to any things that happen out that may come up, new technology and stuff like that. So a lot of this is key in your local zoning and getting with other cities and towns because we're all learning, and next time one town goes a little step further with something, and it's important that if we could facilitate any of that, I'd be more than happy, but it's key to your zoning and staying ahead of it and putting that type of stuff in for to protect yourselves.
All right, that's a good idea. I think our planning director, you could come up to the mic and just on one of the mics on the end, please. Apps.
I just wanted to point out back to your point on the study or the impact fee.
Yes.
We actually amended our subdivision regulations to allow the Planning Commission the authority to require any developer, not just for renewable energy, but really for any development that might have a broader impact, to contribute money into escrow for outside consulting, because obviously town staff and town engineer, that's not our area of expertise, and taxpayers shouldn't fund that study. So that's actually on an upcoming town council agenda. Yes, approving on-call engineers for that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
But the thought that there's $9,000 for the solar array is just ridiculous, so it really does need to be addressed, and, okay, if there are
Well,
any
I would like to take
yes,
the opportunity,
please.
if I may, Mr.
Yes,
President, to seize
absolutely.
on this too, because this is a double pronged issue. Thankfully, we're now openly talking about the impact it's going to have in the out years on towns for cleanups. But what was most apparent to me right off the bat was the impact it was having on the lives of residents. We don't know still. We may be able to put aside money to clean up where 100 acres of trees were clear cut and solar arrays were put up. But are we considering what that's doing to the aquifer, to the Moosup River, to people's wells, to septics, to roads? We saw Greenhouse Road completely washed out after the first rainstorm by just erosion. These things aren't being considered, or weren't being considered initially, and still I think are not receiving the attention due. So I bring this up because I want the town as a good body to, when you're working on the zoning and planning, to also consider that. There are, I don't want to say countless, that would be a little bit of an embellishment, but there's a bunch of civil suits right now in the state based on the just civil law nuisance violations of these installations. And there can be impacts on towns. So I think that needs to be considered, the human impact of this on these installations as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we'll move on to number 8, the discussion of vaping in schools. And the school department has suggested this. You want to explain it?
I'm going to speak on behalf of Mr. Levis. He also is ill tonight, so wasn't able to be here with us. But as most people know, vaping is a big issue for us in schools right now, and not just Coventry and not just Rhode Island. It is a national issue with kids at this time. So we have attempted to bring national experts in to talk to our children and our students. We've had parent forums. We're trying to educate, as educators do, but we are not seeing the impact and decrease in the prevalence around this behavior with kids. So we have been advised to speak to the legislatures about whether there would be talk on the state level about some legislation that may support us in this work to try to get a handle on this before it gets really out of control.
If I might add to that a little bit, excuse me. It's not just about educating the students. It's also about how these vaping products are being marketed to children. I've heard commercials on the radio. I've seen the commercials on television from certain companies saying, oh, this is a smoking cessation product, when in actuality, the things our students our children are able to buy online from China, the way the products, what they call the vaping juices, it's a weird term, but are being, the flavors they're using, it's all marketed towards kids. They're getting our kids hooked on nicotine products. Well, it might not be smoking. The health effects are still questionable. A lot of these juices, the devices themselves, are exposing our children to heavy metal. Inhaling that and getting that into our system, heavy metals are not good for our systems, lead poisoning, etc. They even are marketing some of the devices so that not only are they concealable in the schools, with size being small, we had a presentation recently at the schools where one vaping product was disguised as an asthma inhaler. So they're finding all these loopholes so that they can market these to children so they can get away with vaping. My daughter goes to the high school. It's a huge issue at the high school. The administration has been great in working on this. I know they're putting a lot of resources in it, but it's one of those things where there's only so many bodies you can put to tackle this issue when it's so easy to conceal and there are so many students doing it. So not only are we looking at education or money towards education to make sure our children are not getting hooked on vaping, We also need to maybe start looking at the industry itself. I hate putting any kind of restriction on a commercial industry. Sorry, Republican, libertarian kind of guy. But when they start marketing these addictive chemicals to our children, we really need to start taking a closer look at that and understand at the state level what kind of restrictions, if any, can we put on this industry so they're not able to do this. Sorry, a little long-winded, but you get the point. Pretty passionate about this one.
And just to, as an aside to that too, is a lot of these vaping products have nicotine in them. They say they don't, but there is nicotine. And, you know, it gradually, like with cigarettes, it's gonna get more and more and more because then you become addicted and you buy more of the product. So it's a huge issue. It really is.
Do any of the state legislators have a comment?
I don't know of any specific vaping legislation this year, but I believe one of our colleagues, Representative Tansey, has in the past tried to address this issue through legislation. And I agree with Committee Person Pearson. This is absolutely marketed to children. And we saw, I think with the tobacco settlement in the 90s, we saw requirements by the federal government put on tobacco companies to lighten up the marketing towards children. So it's certainly not unprecedented. I, like you, believe that people should be free to make their own choices, et cetera, et cetera. But we're dealing with something. It was one thing when a police officer could go by a school and see young kids smoking a cigarette and know that they were violating the law. It's a totally different thing now to see a kid using an asthma inhaler, as you use it, for example. So law enforcement's hands are almost tied on this. It is an issue where I think the state does have to get into regulations, but it is a tough thing to regulate.
Okay, yes.
I just wanted to bring, I just also wanted to bring up one other thing about, if there's any way, and I'm not sure if this is possible, but the GA, it's really the the FDA that has been reluctant to do testing on these products to see what the danger is, because they just haven't done it. And there's been some resistance on doing that. So I'm not sure if the GA can do anything like, say, you know, publicize it to the FDA or to the federal government. I'm not sure how the connection works, or if there's anything you could do about it, because I think right now it's being passed off as harmless, and it certainly isn't. There's really no experimental data, and quite frankly, smoking, when it finally started being tested, is when people were able to actually regulate it on the federal level, and on the state level. So right now, there's not really a lot of testing, and so until that happens, and the FDA is you know, forced to basically do this, I don't think we'll see a change here. But certainly, like Mr. Pearson and the rest of us have said, when you market flavors to kids, you know, that are like strawberry and something that sounds luscious, and we don't even know what's going into their bodies with this. And when the ones that do have nicotine in them, apparently just one vaping of it is almost like a couple of packs of cigarettes or something. I mean, it's
equal to 20 cigarettes.
Huge. It's huge what our kids are being exposed to, and so we really have to do something about this. It's incredibly.
May I elaborate? What occurs, and I see children driving to the high school in the morning, you see the smoke coming out of the windows. And what happens is, with particular vaping, with vaping products, you get an adrenaline rush. And we don't know what that does when teenagers are driving or when they're at school. We don't know the effects on their behavior. So I think Representative Tansey is onto something, and she would be an excellent person to network with, and so maybe she could get support from the speaker and from the leadership to address the issue, because it's hurting lives, is what it's doing. It's hurting a lot of lives. Okay, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Flavio. Is there anybody else who has any comments? Mr. Cody?
I kind of come at this from two different sides. First of all, You can't legislate common sense. I wish you could, but you can't. You can't. And case in point, listen, nobody's going to legislate that out of my pocket. Nobody's going to tax that out of my pocket. Nobody's going to, but the reason it's there is because these nicotine products have been proven to be more addictive than any other illegal drug you can buy on the street. And I know. For those of you who don't know about me, I'm a recovering drug addict. Been clean for 22 years. Have never been able to kick nicotine because it's more powerful than any other drug I ever put into my system. So we need to educate these children on the danger of nicotine poisoning to their system. You can't legislate it away from them. I wish we could. I've got grandchildren that are coming up that I worry about. I know they see me smoking. And I know in their head they think it's okay because Papa does it. And it's not okay. It's not okay. But we can't legislate kids to be smart enough not to pick up these products. We have to teach them about the outcomes of the use of these products. And hopefully they're smart enough to not do it or to stop what they've been doing. You know, if we could legislate common sense, what a beautiful world we'd live in. But we can't. These kids are going to do it until they know for sure, until you can convince them that this is a slow death. You're slowly killing yourself every time you put one of these products in your mouth. Then they'll smarten up and they'll stop. Thank you.
Senator Raptakis, you had something?
Yeah, I was going to say also, I think the federal delegation, our federal delegation here in Rhode Island, should maybe have some sort of dialogue between not just this school committee, but probably maybe all the school committees to say, look, we have a problem, and probably with the members of Congress to sit down with FDA or maybe try to either pass some type of rules or regulations in Congress. It's just like cigarettes. We've always had a problem with cigarettes, but maybe tackle that one issue with the flavors, maybe prohibit them from selling these vapor cigarettes that have, flavors. I think really that's the time where we can get together from the General Assembly and maybe even pass a resolution to our 4 members of Congress who have direct contact with the Federal Drug Administration. I think that's where we should maybe start the discussion from here and go right to the members of Congress.
All right, thank you for that. Any other comments? If not, I'm actually, I see I skipped number 7, but it was pretty closely related to number 6. Are you all set, the planning department? Is there any other questions on that? Any concerns? All right, so we'll move right on to number 8 then. Number 9, discussion of Rhode Island General Laws, Chapter 45-23, the subdivision of land, and that was brought up by the planning department. So
Yeah,
if you would
so
give that explanation,
we're
that'd be
going in a
great.
completely different direction from the last discussion. So the subdivision of land, that includes all development that would be put forth. So that includes solar arrays and wind turbines and housing development, not just subdivision. But what happened in 2017 is that amendment was passed, which sharply reduced staff review times and planning commission review times for proposals for land development. And for example, a major application for land development at either the master or the preliminary stage, which is the very, very technical stage, was slashed from 60 days for review to 25 days for review. And that's not just business days, that includes weekends and holidays. And for many people, they're probably thinking, well, that's a long time. But for places like Coventry, we are a 4-person staff. We operate basically a storefront type operation where we are constantly bringing people in, constantly doing other business. So it is quite a reduction in our ability to address all of the technical merits of an application, confer with fellow department heads like Public Works, review permits from DEM, DOT, make sure that all of these things are in order, and ultimately certify. What we do is we certify a plan complete. And all of these timeframes fall within this sort of statutory schedule that is set up. So no planners were at the table when this was devised and approved. Planners were alarmed and sort of shocked that that this was passed. The Rhode Island chapter of the American Planning Association has a legislative committee that's been working with the League of Cities and Towns to restore some of the timeframes and actually have a conversation about what makes sense. Many of the changes that were made were okay. I mean, there was an extravagant amount of time before that we were happy to give up some of the timeframes if that made the development community more comfortable. But 25 days to have a very technical application in our office and certified complete just isn't realistic. And in turn, it's another 90 days from that certification point to a decision by the Planning Commission. And that is also pretty difficult to make because planning commissions, they might not convene, there may be scheduling issues, but with the risk that is run when we overrun that statutory timeframe is that the development application is automatically approved. And so that's a pretty hefty risk, particularly on some of these large applications. And so what the APA Legislative Committee has proposed is to come back to a more moderate position. That was not the drastic timeframes that were approved last year, but maybe not the more extravagant timeframes that were in existence. So I guess what the request is from the planning department is that if you see any legislation, and I believe something will be introduced, to return some of those timeframes. If you have any questions, please give me a call. I'm happy to talk about things that have an impact and maybe things that are of lesser concern.
All right, thank you very much. Does anybody have any comments to that text?
One quick question. What section of 45-23 was the amendment? And also, one solution could be, look, the city of Providence probably has about 12 to 15 planners. Maybe they should have a shorter time frame. Maybe the 25 days gets adopted to Providence, but somewhere like Coventry, where you tell me 4, maybe Foster, there's only 1. Maybe by the population of how many members of the planning board, maybe that's how the time frame should be dictated. Because it's unfair to say Providence, you're going to have to wait 60 days while they have 12 members, but Coventry, you have 4. Maybe the 25 days should be increased maybe to 30, 35 days.
Actually, for places like Providence, they're so built out that they actually don't have developments at such a large scale. I mean, we can have, 100 housing units in a subdivision that we need to review and review it quickly. We actually, and I have it, if you're interested, I can give it to you, the amended proposal that has the markups that we're proposing. We've actually suggested some things that were not in the previous legislation that we think might help the development community get to some agreement a little bit faster, things that they didn't think of because they didn't have us at the table. So as much as we're trying to take back on the master and preliminary, we're giving back to them in terms of other stages of review or in the minor plan development. So I actually have that. If you're interested, I can give that to you.
You can email it.
Sure.
It's fine.
Sounds good.
That'd be great. Is there any other comments on it?
Yeah,
Yes,
I definitely, could you email me that also? We ran into that in my other towns, and that came about where, that's where businesses are getting involved, and it's starting to run up against timeframes, and they've got loans out, they have to meet deadlines and everything else, and this is where it runs into each other. So if we can find a middle ground, I'm sure we can be applicable
I
for the
think if
business.
everybody's at the table,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
something that
And
we
again,
can
I
do.
wasn't up there when that was done, but I was sitting on the other side of the table in the town when we were running into deadline problems, and they were taking us to court under that loophole
Mhm.
and causing us money and pushing
Sure.
it through.
Well, I'll
So-
email it to the town manager. He can
Okay, thanks.
disperse.
Can I get
Okay.
a copy of that too, so I could work on the house lot side?
Yeah, we'll just send it.
Okay, great. If there's no more comments on that, we'll move on to number 10. And that would be a discussion on career and technical education programs and school choice. And that was brought up by the school department. So is there?
Okay.
Okay. Sarah?
So the primary concern around this is the current commissioner has taken the stance that whether a school district offers a certain career and tech or pathway program, that student still has the option to go to a different school district. So using as an example, we have an auto program, and a student that goes to Charahoe could choose to go to Charahoe for that same exact program, and we as a sending district have to pay that out-of-district tuition. It's really I think a stretch on what the intent was. Clearly, I think the school committee understands that if we don't offer a program to our current students and they find that program elsewhere, that student should be able to go, and the school district would accommodate for that. But as it stands right now, we have students leaving our district for programs that we offer. And for the first time, our out-of-district tuitions, non-related to special ed, exceed our special ed out-of-district tuitions, and it's something that's almost impossible to control. I know this is somewhat controversial, given some of our counterparts over there who represent a district where there's a lot of students going into. But I think this definitely needs to be looked at because there's very limited avenues that we have to control those out-of-district expenditures, which is just taking away resources from all of the students that we have here in Coventry.
Any comments on that? Yes.
Absolutely. And just as a precursor, there will be folks in the room who do not like what I'm about to say.
No.
Look, we have a two-tiered education system in the state of Rhode Island. We have those who go to public schools, and the numbers have indicated that they are being failed by the schools they go to. And then we have private parochial charters that are doing much better. If you're able to afford to send your kid to a private school, you do, because you don't want them to go through the public education system anymore. School choice is tremendously important, not just from public to private, but also among public schools. And that's what we're seeing here. The free market is working as it should, and to the detriment of Coventry. And also, Ms. Mandarelli touched on it, it is working right now to the favor of one of the communities that I represent. But there are impacts that are going to be negative on that as well. We're already feeling them. The issue, I think, is a larger issue that goes all the way back to, let's look at these score number, the test scores that we just got, and figure out what the heck we're going to do with education in the first place. That's a fundamental question, because we can talk about doing all of these wonderful things, but if the foundation of the house we're trying to build is crumbling, it doesn't matter how nice we build whatever it is we're working on. So we have that. We have to address what is wrong. Why are our kids in public schools not making the grade? Our governor just announced that she wants us to emulate Massachusetts so we can get to the point where they are. They're at a 50% proficiency with math and reading rate. And that's what our goal is? We're striving for mediocrity? It just doesn't make sense. The holistic approach is the only approach that's going to work on the schools. The poaching of students is going to continue. The capitalist in me says, you know what, toughen up, get more programs, make yourselves more attractive. But I know that that's not realistic all the time, because I'm pragmatic at the same time. And towns are hurting. They're losing students. You guys are one of the towns. You're having a net outflow of students. How this gets fixed or addressed on the poaching, I don't know. I don't know what the solution is there. This is a beast of Ride's own making. This is a beast of those who have continually beat down every effort to expand private schools, access to funds to help underprivileged families get into parochial private charters. There has been an onslaught against any school that is not a public school. This is a making of the public school system in the state of Rhode Island. I'll do what I can, but I need the leaders who made this problem to come up with solutions.
Representative Norway, I go to PTA meetings, and I've seen your family, and your children seem to be getting an excellent education. Could you elaborate on that?
They are getting an excellent education, but I won't disagree with part of what you're saying. The family has to put in what you expect to get out. You can't just drop your kid off at school and expect that everything's going to be learned at the school or taught at the school. So I credit what my wife and I are doing at home with part of the excellent education, but I don't disagree that there are issues that we need to address within the school to get those test scores better, to work harder, to get better grades. But again, I don't know that legislation stopping people from making the choice that's going to be best for their family is going to actually be successful. I do agree with what Rep. Chippendale is saying. We have to work harder, and it starts at home, and it has to go all the way through.
I'd like to add a little bit of that too.
Yes,
because,
Senator
again,
Rogers.
I was involved with Sarah. She helped build that program over there. I believe she was involved. So the school choice has really produced a great environment at that region up there, and it's been a leader. And we focused on that, and the school choice actually promotes the competition that's going to make your schools better by providing or trying to compete with them. So without them having that, I think it would have just kind of stayed level key. So unfortunately, the school choice by that has pushing things in a better direction for you to provide a better school system. We could have on that, and I know they could have enrolled in a lot more, but they're pretty smart thinking up there. They don't want to balloon it out and grab too many, so they've kind of put the heels on it a little bit so they don't have a bubble on the other end. So it's a pretty good program up there, and I think they are taking a lot from other communities, but it's forcing them. Situate, one of my other districts, is starting to invest a lot of money and starting to try and catch up. One thing I'm always for is regionalization. That's always been something I've pushed on, and sometimes maybe, like I explained to Situate, and I just threw it in their mind. This is just me thinking out of the box. The regional school is probably 6 to 7 years ahead of the town of Situate from where we are, and that is if we stop. And it's a racetrack. We're not going to stop up there. They're not going to stop. They're going to continue. So they're always going to be trying to play catch up. So at some point, we maybe ought to start regionalizing a little bit more where we can, and maybe that's something to think about. But again, it's competition. It's pushing the envelope to provide better education. So,
Thank you.
May I just add a
Yes,
couple more things? So, in general, I do agree that it has spurred competition and thinking outside of the box. Unfortunately, there are still so many constraints. That was kind of a perfect situation that came into fruition. So yes, good for Foster Gloucester, but it has in a lot of ways pitted school districts against each other. So while this maintenance of effort may have pitted schools and towns versus each other, it's pitted the schools against each other, and there are a lot of other constraints factors that are going into it. One, we are seeing some potential leaving for athletics. That is not the intent of this. It should not be an open recruiting for, recruiting star athletes up to a program. So that needs to be looked at. Also, then this maybe should weigh into the funding formula and looking at facilities and structures in general. If we're going to have free choice, then we really need to put everything on the table. You cannot require communities to have a minimum maintenance of effort for their expenditures for maintenance costs and cap what you can charge on career and tech and cap what you can, ask local taxpayers, and then also face that non-maintenance of effort from the state level. So I understand that there is a spur of competition, but there's also too many constraints against some of the other schools to have the resources to do that, especially in communities like Coventry that already were very heavily invested in infrastructure, which is something that Foster Gloucester with 2 schools does not have that weight of 7 schools holding them down that they're trying to maintain. So I agree, but I still think that this needs to be part of the bigger conversation about maybe even maintenance of effort on education, and really what is that intent of school choice? Is it athletics? Is it some of these other items, or is it really about the core programs that are being offered?
I would love the opportunity to meet you in your office and talk about that, because I know, and I don't know how the funding formula is. You may have a different per pupil cost from Coventry versus we're pulling in from Situate or another town. I know there was discussion of standardizing that number, where if you do that, some towns may be on the bad side, some towns may be on the good side. There's many things that we can discuss, and I don't disagree with that, and I'd love to sit down and talk to you about that in your office and come up with some ideas and work together with that.
I think Sarah makes a good point there, and actually, I appreciate if you would do that. That way, we can work towards a solution or tentatively. Yes. Excuse me? Yes, yeah, why don't we do that? Let me have the school chair, she wants to make a comment first.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on guess I'm just gonna talk loud. Which one?
I don't know what it is about your voice.
I don't know. I just wanted to add another comment about the competition between towns and where you might want to send your child to a public school. For us in Coventry, our high school is going to be a big high school. It's just the way it is. And so there are those people who would much rather have their child in a smaller school. That's one of the alluring things about private schools. So we're at a real disadvantage. And again, the capital funding to put new furniture in your new VOTEC, your technical programs or your pathway programs, another town might not have that money, and we're never going to have that money. But that doesn't mean our program per se is worse. It's just as good as what's being offered in Pontigansett, just Pontigansett looks better. Because when our kids go over there and look at it, it's a brand new spanking beautiful school. Has beautiful furniture, but teachers, I would guess, are not doing, the curriculum isn't any better than what Coventry can offer. So the competition, so what is the competition? What does it really come down to? It's aesthetics, yeah.
We do have, like I said, I represent Coventry, so I'm not sticking up for one more than the other. But I know when I've asked what's doing the big draw, some of the draws are the agricultural program that we provide that Coventry doesn't have. There are, and that is the biggest draw from, actually, I believe, from the town of Situate is our agriculture and our ag department. So those are the big ones, and I think we got a tech program that is pretty far above the other communities that we draw on. So there's 2 or 3 pathway programs that we do provide that are far and above most other communities, and that's where the big draw is coming from.
But when they're the same and a child can go,
Yeah, but
that's what the killer is for us.
I
So if it's a
understand.
computer or science pathway, and we offer it too,
I don't think that's the big draw. I do believe it's the ones I mentioned, and that's the 80%, 85% of the draw. Those
I'm not sure that's true of Coventry.
Well,
Right.
again,
Yeah.
I can only go on what information I've been told.
Right. So for Coventry, we have a little bit of a different draw. We did have computer science, the biomed program. So some of those we have since started. But I think the concern is even now that we're offering them, students still have the choice to go to a different school. So we're not going to allow students to start going to Jamestown for English. You know, like we offer English, they should stay here with us. So again, using Ms. Patno's example of a computer science, regardless of who offers the computer science, if that home district offers it, they should stay there unless that program is not offered. We don't offer agriculture. You have an excellent program up there. That's one that would make sense. I don't think that's even on our radar to start a program like that.
Right, so I'd love to
So-
sit down when you go, because this is stuff I can try and help you with.
Perfect.
Okay, great. I think on that note, it is, we're gonna take a 5-minute break. Everybody can stretch and use the facilities, whatever, and then we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's not all run at once.
Coffee like this.
That's where I'm going, to try to make sure we get it done.
Back to work.
I know we could socialize for quite a while, but we do have quite an agenda, and I'd like to, yes, sir.
We're gonna kill any of the MOE ones, we're not gonna bring them up, they're satisfied.
Okay.
There should be one more that's on here, a little deeper in the MOE. You can kill
Okay,
that.
all right. Yeah, as I'm sure everybody, it's very productive, but I'm sure we want to move right along. No one wants to be here all night, so we'll start out on number 11, a discussion on the Rhode Island General Law 45-54-4, Rhode Island Low and Moderate Income Housing Act, and that was submitted by the Planning Department. So if you care to elaborate on that, please.
Sure. I believe this was actually discussed at the last year's legislative meeting. There's a couple of aspects to this particular legislation. The planning directors from around the state met with statewide planning, and we actually went through a number of potential planning issues, but this was the number one issue for all of us. There's two aspects to it. One is that it doesn't accurately capture the true affordability of housing. Go for it.
Quick question, so 4554-4 is resolution conclusive as to capacity of corporation regarding municipal detention facilities.
Is that the right one?
Probably not.
So, just so we know what we're looking at, we wanted
Okay.
to,
Well, we'll send you the correct citation.
thank you.
Okay. So there's two aspects to it. One is that it defines affordability in very narrow terms. So it has to be a property that's government subsidy, has a government subsidy for at least 30 years. And so for a number of properties like manufactured housing, which we have quite a bit of in Coventry, that doesn't count. Section 8 doesn't count. Affordable rentals don't count. Low-income housing, affordable dwelling units, like a granny flat kind of thing, doesn't count. So for Coventry, since this legislation was first passed in the mid-2000s, even though you could argue that there are many affordable housing opportunities, our affordable housing rate as defined by the state has barely budged. It was 3.76 back in 2005. It's now 5.3, which is a difference of 1.64% in almost 15 years. So it's not, at least in this town, creating what it's supposed to do. The second piece of it is that it allows comprehensive permits, which allow a developer to introduce very dense housing that maybe the community doesn't actually support. But if they include a 25% affordable component, they can sort of be streamlined through the permitting process. And what has happened is invariably planning and zoning boards deny the projects. They appeal to the State Housing Appeals Board, which almost always supports that development. And then it's returned back to the town for either some sort of negotiation or approval. And what has happened is a lot of times it goes in as an affordable housing development proposal, but comes back with maybe one affordable unit out of 75. So on multiple levels, it's not creating a development that the community would support or the local planning commissions would support. And it's not actually raising the affordable housing numbers. So this legislation has made a lot of communities unhappy. And even though there's nothing that I'm aware of being introduced right now, I just wanted to just put it out there that it's still an issue. So.
Any state legislators have a comment on that? Yes, Senator Rogers?
I've actually got the book, and this is what we got from the housing through the state. You guys are actually doing a lot better in the town of Coventry than most of the other communities. On the list right here, Coventry is about second, pretty close to the top of almost compared to other cities and towns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're about 7th out of 39 from actually, some of them have hit the mark, but out of the 39, there's a lot more down there. So, I don't know, I think I gotta figure out what you guys are doing, my other 3 communities ain't doing, because you're doing a lot better than them.
Well, I think that the question too is how many have actually succeeded in creating the 10%, and that's not very many.
I think there are, and I had that, I think there's 4 or 5.
Yeah, but out of, how many municipalities, that's not that much.
That's right. If our manufactured homes were included, we'd be number 1.
Right.
Probably.
And we tried every year to get the manufactured homes in. I'd love to keep trying, but it seems not to,
It's how the system is set up,
Yeah, we do put legislation in to try to make allowances for in-laws and mobile homes in that affordable. It just gets rejected summarily. This, if we recall, I talk a lot, but earlier I mentioned something about how the towns aren't able to anticipate the state's approach because they use a cookie cutter approach. This is the perfect example of it, where you can say to a place like East Providence and Pawtucket and Central Falls and Providence and Johnston, you need 10% affordable housing. Geographically and demographically, it's possible for them. But let's say a developer wants to put a unit in Green and wants to make it affordable. This exact statute that the planner is so accurately talking about here would allow that person to sue you into enabling them to build that project. What would happen in Green were there to be any affordable housing? Let's say there's 10 units. Well, first of all, there's no plumbed or piped services. There's no sewers, there's no gas, there's nothing underground. So you got wells. Where are you going to get all the wells? Septic, ISDSs. Where is all the human waste going to go? Secondly, there's no bus line. It's a requirement for, folks in Section 8 are oftentimes reliant on public transportation. You'll have that issue. The data from HUD is very clear that in these types of installations, crime skyrockets. Calls to ambulances skyrocket because they don't have a car to get to the doctor. Call an ambulance, they go. The impact on towns of trying to achieve this pie in the sky, rainbows and unicorn, 10% affordability is nothing but bad policy. It's crippling towns like yours and like so many others in the state trying to achieve it. Thankfully, we're not at a point yet where they're punitively attacking the towns who aren't able to get there, but make no mistake, it's not that far. So start considering what may happen. And again, there are counties in this nation who have been sued by HUD because they said, no, we cannot have that affordable housing project in our area, wherever it was, and they lose every single time. This is a huge problem. This mandate by the state is an anchor around the neck of every small town, and I don't think it really works. Other than repealing this, I have no idea how we stop this.
Yeah, I mean, when I was on the council, I voted no on all the CDBG grants, but they all passed, and that's what ties you into the HUD. It's kind of like the highway funds. You got to put a seatbelt law in, and we're not going to give you any money. And I voted no on that. It did pass, but it's all the communities that are pretty much hitting their mark the Central Falls, Providence, Pawtucket, and Woonsocket. You can't even compare them to us. We're completely different. So they're the ones, we're outnumbered up there. When it comes to this issue, we are completely outnumbered because I'm sure they'd like to send some of that stuff our way to release the burden on them and share the pain.
I mean, I would object as a planner. I mean, I support, and I think most planners do support affordable housing.
Oh, yeah.
When we think of affordable housing, it's not some other. It's your parents, it's your kids.
It's how that's counted.
It's just that we need to have a more comprehensive definition of what we are calling affordable housing. And I think that we need to, the developer giveaway is essentially the problem that it creates because it's not actually achieving its goal. It's just building another subdivision that is either overly dense or it's just not an affordable housing development anymore. It's just a really unacceptable housing development.
Well, the issue with them is that what they consider stock is they may have a house that's considered affordable housing, the unit itself, and it's locked into that thing for 99 years.
Well, under the law, though, it's 30 years, but that can be problematic as well because as you have a maturing affordable housing stock, that means that it's on the town to kind of gauge, okay, and there are towns that have their housing stock actually rolling off the affordable subsidy, and so they're no longer affordable. So even when you thought you had achieved it, you may not in 10 years. All of those housing units may fall back off of it.
And it's also segregated into elderly, single-family houses, and it even cuts the pie even that way even harder sometimes.
Yeah, well, it depends. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes when you have senior assisted living type of situation,
and that's where some of the communities like us are actually getting their higher numbers.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, are there any other comments on that? Okay, we're gonna skip 12, we're gonna go to number 13. It's discussion of, on a MERA program to Massachusetts Chapter 90 Municipal Infrastructure Capital Program, funded through several options, an infrastructure bond, portion of either the gas tax, gambling revenue, or toll tax. And that was submitted by the DPW. So Kevin, if you would care to explain a little bit on that, elaborate?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Here we go. Similar to what the legislators and the governor has done this year in addressing the need for capital improvement funding for the school departments, we woefully keep forgetting about the municipal side. Because most of the tax rates are at the max, our infrastructure needs, whether it be for town buildings or for infrastructure, whether it be roads and bridges, culverts, sidewalks and curbing, storm drainage. Every time that we put money in for a capital improvement project, it gets denied because there's not enough money. Since 1994, 25 years ago, Mass DOT has put together a program which is Chapter 90. It's a 100% reimbursable program which allows a factor based upon road miles, population, and employment for that formula to be done. The state of Massachusetts apportions $200 million. That's apportioned to every community by that same formula that they receive those monies available to them. And they put together a project request list. Once that request is approved by DOT, the project is done, it's totally reimbursed, and you have a reimbursement request form from DOT to get that money back. I don't expect the legislature or the governor to come up with $200 million for infrastructure, but this is not for the town of Coventry. This would be a statewide program so that every community would have a funding mechanism each year for their municipal infrastructure needs, whether it be municipal buildings, which are all in the 50, 60-year-old range, or whether it be the road systems. This town in the capital, we need at a minimum of $1.25 million each year just to work on maintaining and upgrading our roads, which is only $250,000 per district. But each year, that continues to get pushed out, and we have no capital. So we only have a snowball's effect on the degradation of our infrastructure. We need to look at that. One of our biggest investments this community has is in our infrastructure programs, whether it be through catch basins, whether it be through our road systems and our buildings, and we need to start addressing that. This avenue here, a similar mirror program, similar to what Mass DOT has, would allow all the communities to have a funding mechanism each year to put into the municipal side, similar to what they've just addressed with the school department.
Kevin, how did you say this was funded?
This could be funded, again, Mass DOT has this through their general revenue, but we could have this, we can go back to the town, to the state, and ask either through the gas tax, gambling revenue, or through the toll tax, or any other revenue. But even if it's something as small as $50 million for all 39 communities, a portion based upon that factor or that formula would help each community start addressing the municipal infrastructure needs. And I offer that to as...
Does any of the senators or reps have a comment on that? I mean, it sounds like a good idea. I mean...
This is the second year I brought it before this body. I haven't got any calls from any state representatives to ask any questions, and I'm hoping that maybe I can incur some interest.
Kevin, I'm looking at the right now, Chapter 90, and they list all the cities and towns. It's a lot of money, and the problem is I'm not sure where they're appropriating the money. Are they getting it from general revenue, meaning maybe from the lottery, or who knows where? But it is a very huge program. The problem here in Rhode Island is you have the road works. So that's all the state roads in Coventry, whether they're going to be dedicated any money for Coventry to fix any of those roads. I'm not sure what projects are in, but mostly the rural roads. The problem is, where do you get this money? If you're anticipating, where'd you get the $50 million figure? Is that anticipated from an estimate, or?
Once again, that number I threw out there, whether it be $50 million or $100 million, could be funded through, once again, either through
Right.
the toll tax, gambling revenue, or through the gas tax. So
Toll taxes, a lot of people don't want to get their cars tolled.
once
That's the problem. A lot of us, I think, in this 8 of us here, were opposed to the truck tolls. So the problem here is trying to find where the money's going to come. That's the big question.
Well,
It's a
Senator-
great program. I commend you for bringing it up.
Well, once again, I'm not looking for the easy answers.
Sure.
Again, this is not for the state roads. Those state roads are
Right,
already
town
funded through
roads.
road, but it's for municipal roadways, city roads, and town roads that are not just rural roads, but these are the roads everywhere from the West Warwick town line all the way to the Connecticut town line. But those are the asphalt roads or gravel roads, bringing them up to a standard that the town has. But
Year is ask the voters of Rhode Island, similar to Massachusetts, have a here in Massachusetts, the formula they would use. That would probably be the easiest way to get this as a statewide project, and maybe probably the fastest way. But
That's
we
why
can bring
I-
that up. We can have a discussion with both the House and the Senate, and maybe the governor's office. Say, look, our folks down in Coventry have said that they like Chapter 90. Could we maybe issue a statewide bond and maybe try to help our community, Coventry or Foster or West Greenwich or whatever, to maybe replicate what Mass did? And I can try to make a few phone calls in Massachusetts. Got several colleagues that I know up in Mass to ask them, how is Chapter 90 working and how did you fund it? Is it a yearly appropriation
Yes, it's a
by
yearly-
the state in the budget?
it's a
That could
yearly
be-
appropriation.
They could have that, but again, where did they get that money? That's the key.
A bond would be a great idea to get it kickstarted, but that's a
Right.
one-time fix. You would need something to have steady revenue stream coming
Correct.
in, whether be it, a toll, be it gambling, whatever. I know gambling's getting to be big now in the state of Rhode Island. I mean, the portion of that went to our infrastructure. We have been neglecting our infrastructure for years,
Community
just
roads.
because every other issue we've had to do. So if it wasn't for the fact that we took a $10 million bond out a few years back, our roads would be deplorable, worse than they are now. And we spent that $10 million trying to keep the roads up, so. it's gonna-
Senator, you talk about funding formulas. We're erecting toll gantries, and I know that everyone here from our state delegation voted against that. That was in office at the time, and I appreciate that. And I know they're not bringing in the projected revenue, and they want you to believe that it's because all the gantries aren't up yet, and I'm telling you, it's because people are avoiding the state of Rhode Island and going around. But we're 2 steps away. We just legalized sports betting. We're 2 steps away from instituting an online betting program within the boundaries of the state of Rhode Island. We're 3 steps away from legalizing recreational marijuana. There should be a funding formula. If not today, then in the very near future, the state should be able to come up with a funding formula to help some of the 39 cities and towns that have been neglected in state aid over the last decade. We're increasing our funding to the state, but we're not passing that down to the communities. And I know it's not all communities, because we are certainly passing it down to municipalities such as Providence that needs much more help than the town of Coventry needs. I haven't figured out why yet, but they definitely need much more help than the town of Coventry. So we're not doing it on an even up basis. But there is, if not today, there are funding formulas that are going to be in place in the very near future. You know, that money hasn't been spoken for yet, or it hasn't been publicly spoken for yet. You know, when we instituted the lottery, it was going to go to help pay for education, and everybody's taxes were going to come down because the lottery was going to fund education. Never happened. Let's speak up now and put a hand out looking for some of that funding that maybe doesn't exist today, but we know is going to exist in the near future.
And Councilman, you bring up a good point, because I think the residents or the taxpayers, those that own automobiles, will probably be more receptive to a program that way, because they know it's going to come back to their community. And I think that's the issue. That's the big question. a lot of us were against truck tolls. I think the population in Rhode Island, 65% were against truck tolls. But if you reverse that question and say, look, we're going to impose or try to create a program that's going to help our rural roads in the cities and towns that we live in, probably have more support. And the key question is, we as legislators, we have to figure out what we can grab back from the state coffers. I know myself and my other colleagues, myself alone, the last 5 years, I've gone back to Coventry $113,000 that goes to the Coventry Senior Center, that goes to the police department, Lake Tioga, Maplewood, I can name them all. That's the thing, is try to grab that money back. But you do bring a good point, and that's something that I think we should have a discussion.
Well, I don't think that our legislature should be be put in a position to try to grab that money back.
It's our money.
Right. I think our legislature should be in a position to say, this is what my constituents need. This is the funding formula that's available in the state of Rhode Island, and I'm asking for a portion of that funding formula to bring back to my constituents. And it wouldn't only affect Coventry. You don't only represent Coventry. Hardly any of you represent one municipality because of the way the districts are spread out. So you could, if you can figure out whether it's going to be legalized marijuana, whatever it is, we're increasing our take, but we're not increasing our give. That's my point.
This would definitely be the time to try to reach out to, the state legislators, try to earmark some of that money for infrastructure. I mean,
I think an important point is it's, for all intents purposes, it's a $10 billion budget. And it's the answer isn't to keep raising taxes. It's to try and straighten out up there where they're going to focus the money. And that's, the money goes where they get votes. And that's the problem. And the reality is we're going to suffer out here. But a lot of times I've seen where they fill those holes when we have something like this and we put a bill forward to do that, there's nobody around. What needs to happen is it needs to be twofold. We could put the bills in. Well, I saw the gun bills going in. It was 4,000 people all the way down around the street and down the hallway and down a half a mile down the street. That made a difference.
Let us know what we can do as a town. I mean, we'd love to, have a program like that and money earmarked to, infrastructure. I mean, we put in resolutions, go there, I carry signs, whatever it takes. We need to take care of our infrastructure.
The 4 towns I'm involved in, I know for a fact Foster is running, they can't even fix bridges. We are in
Mr. President?
deep trouble.
Could I ask a question, even though I'm not on the council?
Yes.
We have a ranking member of the House Finance Committee here. And I'm wondering, you're not on House Finance? No?
Not tonight.
Oh.
How dare you?
How dare I? Oh.
So we still have a comment, Flavio?
Thanks, Pat.
No.
All right,
No question.
Are there any
Yes.
any other comments? Yes.
Yeah.
Chip Dale.
And again, I don't want to be the guy who's always doom and gloom, but
But you will.
I will, because I don't want to lie. I'm not going to do a political tap dance.
We don't want that. No.
For the past 4 years, and certainly before that, but intensely for the past 4 years, and I can see no reason why it won't continue for the next 4 years, we have seen budgets that have been crafted on scoops, the art of scooping. Is when the government takes a chunk of money from here and puts it over here. And here's a real life example. Just a budget cycle ago, the governor proposed to eliminate state money that goes to Rhode Island Resource Recovery. Raise your taxes by making that reduction in state money going there. But what that did was force Rhode Island Resource Recovery to up the tipping fees to every single town in the state of Rhode Island. So the state did raise your taxes, but they just made these guys do it for you. Right. So we are in fat times, if you want to listen to everyone, the governor and the president and everyone else. We're in high times right now, right? We're living high off the hog. The economy's doing great. Numbers have never been this great. And we're scooping still to this day out of the budgets. So if we're doing that in fat times, just to pay the bills on the state level, what's going to happen when things get lean? And where would this? They are searching every corner of every nook and cranny in this state to find money just to fund the budget, which is $10 billion, including the scoops. If they're resorting to scoops now, there will never be a long-term funding solution for what they will ultimately say is the responsibility of the towns to keep up their own roads. That's what the argument always falls down to. I'm being pragmatic when I tell you don't look to the state for this recurring fund to come fix the roads in the town of Coventry, or any other town for that matter, because all they are doing is scraping just to meet their minimum requirements right now.
Representative, I understand where you're being pragmatic, and I appreciate that. However, we're talking about all the taxpayers through all 39 communities. This is not about scooping. This is about the legislature and the governor going through and putting roadblocks, again, unfunded mandates, saying you cannot raise taxes more than 4%. You know, mandating the capitals for the schools. So if they can find the money for the schools, there's two sides of the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Why not the municipal side?
I don't disagree at all.
Your argument about saying, well, it's up to your responsibility to take care of your own roads. It's our responsibility to take care of our own schools, and we can't accomplish that. So we can't accomplish the roads and bridges also, and we need help on the state level also.
And I don't disagree with anything you just said, Kevin. I'm merely pointing out how recklessly we budget in the state, and how under the current paradigm, we'll never have that's a nice to have thing, right? Sending state money to the towns to help them with their roads. We don't have the need to have things in Rhode Island. We can't pay for those. So I'm only saying this not to say that it's not important. It is. The practical reality is this budget in the state is going to continue to grow, and what the state sends to towns is going to continue to shrink. That's just what we've noticed. It's the trend, and I don't see anything that indicates that's going to stop.
I have all confidence in this legislative group to be able to help the taxpayers of the town of Coventry. And
that's a lot of work, guys.
I have faith, and I believe the League of Citizen Towns would come on board with this also, because it affects and helps every community in this state.
And that would certainly help if the league did.
Thank you.
Have you addressed the league at all? Have you talked to anybody from the league, or would you like the town manager or something to?
Once again, my point was to come before this body and present this offer. You know,
Well, then we definitely would look into something like that. I mean,
Thank you.
the plan sounds great. It's just like, I understand where the money's coming from. I understand that. Anybody else have any comments on that? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to, thank you. We'll move on to number 14, which I think, discussion on a needed revision of Title 42, which requires municipalities to maintain sidewalks on state highways. And that was also submitted by our DPW director.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, on Title 42, Section 4213.1, the town of Coventry, and I'm sure all communities have the same problem. We don't have enough funding to maintain our own sidewalks on our town roads. And yet, there's a provision in this state law, and every time we've asked the state DOT to come and repair portions of sidewalks on state roads, they're giving me this piece of the legislation that I provided to you folks that says it's the town's responsibility to maintain sidewalks on state roads. This is untenable. It's not even fathomable that they will go and sweep the roads, the sidewalks, but they won't go and repair their sidewalks to make it safe. And it's the town's responsibility. I can't fix our own sidewalks. How the hell am I gonna do the state roads? You know? So I ask that you folks look at this, and again, I'll read the last paragraph of this section. This is from 4213.1, and this says, the legislators providing for state highway system held not to have intended to relieve towns of duty to keep sidewalks safe through adjoining state highways. It appears to be well settled in this state that the liability of a municipality to keep its sidewalks safe is established by statute. The Rhode Island Department of Transportation is required only to annually sweep all sidewalks on all state highways, causeways, and bridges. The municipalities themselves have a statutory duty to maintain at their expense all highways located within their borders, and by extension, sidewalks. How can we do this? We need your help to get this taken out of the legislature, out of the statute. It needs to be amended to let the state DOT maintain its own sidewalks. We'll find the funding to maintain the town sidewalks. I can't do both.
I think one solution might be what the Mayor Johnson did. He sued the state of Rhode Island because the town of Johnson was paying for the lights on state roads in the city of Johnston, and he won that case just recently. So that's not a bad idea to try to. Exactly. But here's a mayor, and I've had bills put in to help the fire districts do the same thing. We shouldn't be responsible at all on any state roads, whether it's the sidewalk or whether it's lighting. So that might not be a bad idea that the League of Cities and Towns meet with all the mayors and presidents of city councils or town councils and maybe file a class action lawsuit against the state like the mayor did, and he did win. And the judge ruled in favor of the town of Johnston that they're not responsible to pay for the lighting costs to light state roads. And here in the town of Coventry, we have many state roads, Route 117, 116, Route 3, Hockney Hill Road 118, that the town or the fire district pay for that lighting. So that's probably one remedy right there.
That's a possibility. Obviously, we would like to save on the legal fees if we had to, but is there any legislation that legislators could put in to help maybe change that in any way?
We can put legislation in for anything.
Right. I mean,
Doesn't mean it's gonna pass.
Right,
That's
we
right.
could try it. I mean, and certainly, we could look into it, the town manager, into the League of Cities and Towns, and possibly looking into a class action suit. But certainly, if we could put something in to eliminate that, so we could take care of our own, and the state could take care of their own sidewalks, that would be great.
I agree, and it is reprehensible, especially now we are requiring the ADA, all the ADA compliance, and as a state we're requiring that, but at the same time holding you responsible for doing it. I don't know if this is going to get any better. I think it may even be getting worse. There's a bill in this year that concerns the heck out of me, which will require utilities that do any work on roadways, state or town, be responsible for repaving the entire road from curb to curb.
I totally support that. So.
You may support that, but when the rates for your electricity, gas, and sewer consumers goes through the roof, they're not going to support the people in office.
Representative, those numbers are going to affect every ratepayer, whether it be for town taxes, to have to repair roads because of trenches that have failed, unless they're curb-to-curb repairs, or if it's the rates. Somebody's going to pay, either on the tax side, on the town municipal side, or on the electric bills or the gas bills.
The largest failure, I think, that's precipitating this bill has been on the part of the municipalities to inspect the work being done by the utilities. So you have some, like Bristol County Water Supply, but when they do a patch, it's better than the actual road it's on. And then you have some like Providence that throws some sand and some poppy seeds in there, and they call it a day. That changes from town to town.
We require, Representative, any utility, whether it be Kent County Water, National Grid, Verizon, any patch that is more than 199 feet long has to be curb-to-curb
That's
sidewalks.
a Coventry
That's
requirement?
Coventry.
So you guys are already ahead, but that is coming down, and if that is required on roads like West Shore Road and Route 6 and all of that are constantly being torn up, it's going to impact ratepayers, and it's a way for the state to shift.
Or whether we pay the town taxes, it's still coming.
Point-
we're still going to pay for it.
Point I'm making is this is just another way the state is shifting their responsibility to maintain these roads onto you, who turns on an electric switch in your house or flushes the toilet.
And may I add something to that? Isn't there when a contractor, right? So now you have a home, they want to put in a new water service, right? And then they have to open the road, small area. Again, with this bill passing, if it goes through, now you're talking about curb to curb to just put in a water service. So now a $500 water service tie-in could be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to the average homeowner that builds on a new lot, correct? Going
Oh,
curb
it's
to
only
curb.
it's only curb to curb if it's over 199 feet long.
Not the new legislation that's being put
That's
in.
covered.
It's any road opening will require a curb to curb patch
For the length of the project.
for the length of the project, correct? So again, it's going to be substantial. Because I read the bill and I did not sign the bill because I felt that the bond that the contractors take out should be enough to be able to have 1 year to go back after the contractors to fix the road because the money's already there. And again, as Rep. Chippendale said, we're agreeing a lot tonight, Rep. So as he said, it should be on the city and towns to be going back out timely and re-inspecting these locations so that we're going after those bonds to make sure that those road openings are properly fixed. rather than
rest assured,
rather than continuing to go after the homeowner to pay more money.
That's done before we sign off on any bond, any repair that's done. The town inspects it when it's being done, and then we inspect it within 30 days after it's being done.
I understand, but there are a lot of potholes and sinkholes that I hit every day with my car that I know aren't very old. So again, statewide, we have to address this. You're absolutely right, but there is problems with that type of legislation.
All right, we know, yes, absolutely.
The state of the law, I've just been reviewing what Kevin submitted and looking at some of the laws. The law is, there's one Supreme Court case that says that there is no law that says that municipalities are not required to maintain sidewalks along state highways. So the task is a little simpler than is being put forward. It's silent. All you have to do is put in a law that clarifies it and says the state takes care of it. So, I mean, what Mr. McGee is asking is it's not a heavy lift. You know, it's just a clarification. That's really all it is. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy.
Would you make note, make a resolution?
I'll
All right.
send.
Are there any other comments concerning this? I know it's getting late. We've got number 16. We're going to skip over 15. We'll go to 16. Thank you, Kevin. Discussion on state legislation as it pertains to legalizing recreational marijuana, and that was put in by our town manager. So if you care to elaborate.
I'd just like to get some answers on where it looks like it's going to go this year. I know the governor, she seems to be hot and heavy for getting recreational passed, and obviously with the potential revenue that would be produced from the taxes on it is all well and good for the state. But if it passes, the effects on the cities and towns is going to be huge. The communities, the states that have passed, legalized it already, have had issues with operating motor vehicles while under the influence and limited ability to manage that. If this in fact does pass and it does become, are the cities and towns going to be receiving any piece of this revenue? Is any of it going to be earmarked for, such as Kevin's plan, or is this going back into the general fund to help to cover the $650 million UHIP?
For the schools.
So there's absolutely no talk about doing anything to spread this?
No.
You can do is amend it.
Mr. President, may I make a comment?
Yep, just a second, please. Are you all set?
Yes.
Okay, yes, please.
If I were a betting woman, I would say that this legislation is not passing this year.
Is that correct? Okay.
You could almost take that to the bank, almost.
All right.
I would agree with Representative Serpa, because I also am not going to support it and probably even vote no if it comes in front of our committee. It's going to come in front of the Judiciary Committee, but there's a lot of questions unanswered. You got DUI, now you're going to have MUI, you're going to have marijuana under the influence. And we haven't even resolved any of the problems that we face today with drinking and driving. Now we're going to put another burden on law enforcement throughout this whole state, and there's no even clear, concise what the revenues are going to be. And how do you resolve substance abuse, especially now with those individuals with legalized marijuana? I think it's going to be a catastrophe, especially for our residents that drive our roads, especially those that just don't care. And it's going to be a total nightmare.
I think you make some good points there. I'm personally not for recreational marijuana, but does anybody else have any comments on this?
Yeah, didn't the governor include proceeds from recreational marijuana in her budget?
You're right, Councilman, she did, but even she made a public statement. She said it publicly that she was half-hearted about it. I got this on? She was half-hearted about it, but since Connecticut and Massachusetts are literally beating down our doors, that we might as well do it too. She was very casual about it. I didn't sense a passion. I didn't sense that she's going to fight for it in the budget. A number of legislators that I've spoken with, we've expressed our own concerns about, as the senator said, on not being able to test the way you can test for a DUI. I know many of you have children and grandchildren here. I don't want any bus driver who's just smoked a blunt getting behind the wheel and driving my grandson, law enforcement has already contacted the Speaker's office and the House Finance Office to indicate that they will need additional resources to implement however this is rolled out.
No, listen,
So
and-
it's going to be revenue negative. It's not going to be a resident part. It's going to
Yeah,
be
no,
revenue negative.
until they find a way to test for the amount of THC in your system, just like they can test for the amount of alcohol in your system, I think they need to put the brakes on this. But what kind of a price tag did she put in her budget?
I don't remember the number, Councilman. A what? On 20% on whatever the sales. And then who would get that 20%? Yeah,
So there's still a lot of unanswered questions on
Yeah.
there, and, but I think sections A, B, and C pretty much been answered, so we're gonna move on. If nobody else has any comments concerning legalization of marijuana, we'll go to number 17, and that's a discussion of the municipal transparency portal has significantly increased the cost of operations without financial assistance from Rhode Island. It would be in the best interest of the state to provide resources to municipalities to update technology. And that was brought forward by our town finance department, and if you would care to elaborate on that?
Turn it up.
There we go. Got it right. Thank you. So I'm relatively new here to the town of Coventry. I come from the federal side of things, and it's interesting already. The transparency portal is a new thing to me, and I find it really. I don't want. I'll try to choose my words carefully, but it's causing a drastic time expense on my side. Not only on myself, but also my treasurer. We're working to automate this a little bit better. You can ask our town manager that we're working with a financial system right now that was put in place in 1999. It does not lend itself to the transparency portal. I'm having to export things into Excel and manipulate it myself and create formulas and so forth and so on. And that's why you all hired me to do, and I'm doing this. But again, it's a significant drain. Now, I know from other financial directors across the state that it's a pain for them as well. All I'm looking for is it's not a lot of money or anything of that nature. Yes, I understand that it's all relative, but any type of assistance has been thought about. The Department of Revenue, by the way, the people there have been wonderful to work with. They've been very helpful. However, I think it would be very beneficial for all the municipalities, not only Coventry, but could use some technological advancement on the municipal side. For us, I would love to be able to put this sliver of that towards updating our financial systems or our computer systems, things of that nature that help communicate between departments. If you could ask anybody across the town, I'm all about the communication to make things more efficient and effective across the town. So that's where this stems from. Anything in the budget or any legislation that is out there for assistance with this would be great. Thank you.
Is there anybody, Jim, you have a?
I'll never turn down an offer to
Sure,
talk.
sure.
Transparency is where we're headed, clearly. You know, that's the legislation each year towards, and this even kind of gels into number 18 on the agenda. But you're right. There is a disconnect. And just hearing you relay how you have to sort of manipulate data from one platform to another sounds like something that can be very, very easily solved with very little computer programming. And why shouldn't the state potentially look at assisting towns with that? I think that's worthwhile for us to look into that, and I'll make sure our office does do exactly that.
Thank you. It's an incrementalism kind of a thing. It's
Sure.
very small, but a very, very effective outcome that would help significantly. So that's why I was looking at that.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else that has any?
When the state required the UCOA chart of accounts, I believe they offered financial assistance in getting that up and running, and they actually played a part, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct, Sarah?
So what the state did was that at the time there were not as many vendor players. So if I remember correctly, this was right when I was coming on. But really what they did was they worked with the vendors on a state level to be able to manipulate in the program their software to be able to accommodate UCOA, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. I'm actually more surprised right now that the MTP or Municipal Transparency Portal seems like somewhat new. So I'm curious if any of you sitting here have even used it, because no? So just to give you some context as to what this is even all about,
Yeah, let's do
UCOA was the one step to make uniform accounting across all school districts. That was an tremendously expensive program that we did farm a lot out of state to do as well. And it's still, the intent was to make it uniform throughout school districts. So now they came up with a municipal transparency portal, which this is why I'm shocked that this is so new, because it was a state level driven thing, that we were supposed to combine school and town finances into this portal to compare community to community. Again, when you have 39 different communities that all operate differently with different financial softwares, trying to get it to blend together is somewhat a nightmare. Now you're consolidating a school uniform chart of accounting system with a town that doesn't have a uniform chart of accounting system. So I do agree that there is some issues with the financial software. I think my bigger disappointment, to be honest with you, is that this isn't pushed out statewide, which is what the intent was supposed to be. And keeping with that, there's also an additional audit requirement that still exists for uniform chart of accounts, even though now we have this requirement for the MTP, which is a required disclosure in the financial statements. So even from that perspective, it seems double the amount of audit work at the end of the year that's not efficient, and we're paying additional funds for that audit work to be performed. So that would be my bigger concern on the issue.
Absolutely, Sarah. Thank you very much for that. Not only is it an audit requirement, so that's the last piece that goes through after our entire audit process. So that is the last thing that's holding our audit right now, is that. And it's only for about 3 pages in the entire 170 odd pages. It's for 3 pages, which is already described in all the rest of the financial statements. Not only that, but I now have to do this on a 6-month. So I do the 6th month, then I have to do the 3rd quarter, and then I have to do a 4th quarter, and then I have to restate that 4th quarter again after the audit. So now all the automation that I've been doing is starting to pay off a little bit, because now I can actually start making this next step a lot faster. But there's a requirement that is supposed to be out there. So it's not only a one-time-a-year thing; it's a recurring process, and it's again extremely time-consuming. And I'm surprised as well that it's new. So anyway, thank you very much.
I'll give you an example. We're currently looking at new software, financial software for the town, municipal and school side, and we're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 for a community the size of us. I know Pawtucket recently they switched theirs over, and it was $1 million plus to do Pawtucket. This stuff is not cheap, and again, with everything else that's going on, a lot of this is just unattainable by communities who are being strapped everywhere else. And by putting all this additional reporting on, it's great. The transparency is beautiful, but it's put us behind the 8 ball on getting this stuff out on time and trying to do it and trying to blend multiple systems to meet the state's needs without any assistance. Let me correct that. The employees have been great. They've worked with us a lot, but the bread and butter work is being done by the towns and cities, and we're doing all the work to make it work and make it report. So any assistance that we could get on that to help fund that would be great.
Okay, great. If there's any other comments on that, like you said, anything we could do to help, that'd be great for us. We'll go to number 18, the last but not least, the discussion on the cost of APRA, request and the inability of communities to recoup most of the cost from the requesting person or entity. That was submitted by the town manager. If you want to elaborate on that.
It's another one of those things that sometimes gets to be real expensive for the town, very, very time consuming, without the ability to go back and collect even a fraction of the cost that's involved. Under state statute, the first hour is free for any research and any work we do, and after that, we can collect a whole $15 an hour for it. That's great maybe 50 years ago. Right now, we've got people that may be doing the work depending on what's being requested and how many hours are involved, up to and including $150 an hour for our attorney if he has to go back and review all of the emails. We've had cases where they want emails, so now they've got to be reviewed, checked to make sure they can be released. Extremely time-consuming, extremely expensive to us, and we can kick back and ask for $15 an hour on that. I notice there's a House bill up right now, 5025, going to exempt legislators from paying, if it's work related to exempt them from paying for any APRA request. So this bill is in play right now. It's under the same chapter that if you could look at changing some of these numbers to at least allow the cities and towns to be able to recoup some of these costs. We've had plenty of cases, and I think if you speak to any community, the same boat. People will come in, they want this extensive setup. We'll spend hours, sometimes days, working on it, multiple people, only to have them never show up to come pick the stuff up. We've gone to the point of actually asking for and getting we'll run an estimate on the cost of it and give them that. But like I said, even at that, I mean, finance director, $60, $70 an hour, $15 an hour. We're not getting back anywhere near. I understand for transparency. I love the idea of just letting them work it themselves and go look at it, but we can't do that. So we've got to do the work. We're spending the time. We're taking the time away from everything else that's going on, and we're taking the money away from the citizens and taxpayers. We're not able to fund them because, and again, some of it's good, but some of it, we've had people who come in and they will just constantly, they want this, they want that, they want this. I'd much rather just like, here, go look at it. But we can't, and it's killing us in monetary. But again, it's another one of those things that the towns aren't being helped by the state on paying for some of the stuff that we need to do. So if there's anything that you guys can look at, like I said, this one's in play right now.
Anybody?
Somebody comes in and requires, you've got somebody 10 days to give them what they want.
10 days and then 20 days if we need an extension after that. There have been cases, in our case, we got hit with a lot of stuff on the sewer, and that sewer required hand work. It wasn't computerized stuff. We couldn't just go. So there was an extensive amount of time that we put in on those. And
Yeah, that's where it really hurts you when it's not on a computer and stuff.
exactly. I mean, the old records, that's where we're dying on those non-computerized records.
That is a catch-22 because you'd like it to make it affordable for, you've got the people that want to make sure everything's being done correctly. You don't want to overcharge them to get the information they need to make sure we're all doing our job correctly. So that is a tough one. I mean, I was one of those watchdogs that was always going into the town hall 15, 20 years ago and filling out my requests.
I mean, we get a lot of companies that call or send in the request forms. They're looking for information that they're going to use for marketing purposes. And again, I'm not talking about the citizens who are coming in looking for stuff. These are companies that are causing us a substantial amount of time, and they're getting all this data that we're mining for them. They're getting it at a fraction of the cost, and we have no ability to go back and at least charge a reasonable amount of money and reimburse some of that cost to the taxpayers.
But one size fits all. When you affect them, you affect the other ones. You can't single out one versus the other. That's where we
correct. But I mean, this is what's going on though, and it's expensive. I mean, the police department.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
This folds in with the OMA requirements, Open Meetings Act. We've seen, unfortunately, a lot of abuses of both APRA and OMA. I have tried because small towns, and in particular Western Coventry Fire District, every time they grab my ear, they tell me how horrible it is dealing with these OMA requests. It's a volunteer department with volunteer staff and one person who really wants to evidently hold them right to the letter of the law keeps filing complaints that they have to pay for. Small towns like Foster, these commissions that are now required to post meetings and all these things, they're volunteers. Small towns out here, same thing. I'm not getting any traction because I'm one guy who represents the town of Foster that, frankly, the other 38 cities and towns would like to have completely eliminated from Rhode Island anyway. So I would urge you guys to go back to the League of Cities and Towns on this one as well, because legislators from the western part of the town, state, don't get paid attention to as much as our towns as a whole. So if the league can support an initiative like this, which I can't see any reason why they wouldn't. We all love transparency. We all love openness. No one is trying to hide anything, but there is a cost associated with it. I agree 100%. It's hurting small towns. It was another cookie cutter approach. Please urge the league to ally with those of us in the legislature who are trying to address this so we can get some traction.
Are there any other comments?
Just one on
Yeah.
town manager. So do you have a cost, what it costs the town of Coventry, say 2017? I'm not sure if you have the total cost of 2018, but what did it cost the town of Coventry? And then the breakdown is very important, what Representative Chippendale says. Do we charge the taxpayers or resident of Coventry, or do we charge an out-of-town or out-of-state corporation or company? I mean, this is how maybe we should try to define, again, the current statute in the opera request. But what are the numbers? Are they extraordinarily high, or do we have a cost? Do we know what they were?
There are times, again, if there's a hot button topic, it may get extensive, and we got a lot of that with the sewers. The sewers produced a lot of APRA requests that required a lot of handwork.
Do we have a dollar figure?
I'd have to go back and look at it. I never calculated it out, to be honest. I mean, it's something we could do by looking at all of the requests. But it can be extensive at times. Time consuming is, I mean, I've personally done projects that have taken me 40 hours that, as the IT director, to do and get out for somebody. $40 hours, 15 an hour for 39 doesn't come anywhere near paying what the town of Coventry had to pay me to do that.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
if
you.
there's no other comments, I'd like to personally thank everybody for showing up tonight, especially department heads and the citizens of the town that came here to listen to us. I think it was a healthy discussion this evening. Always, the town council has open communication with any state legislator. We'd love to work together to accomplish some of the concerns that were brought to us tonight. So please, at any time you want to contact any of us and it has a town manager, feel free. If there's anything we can do to help facilitate any of the concerns, I would be appreciated. I mean, and we want to work together and accomplish whatever we can for the town. So once again, I want to thank everybody personally for showing up, the school committee and everybody. I think it was a very productive night, and I am hoping that we can accomplish something. So thank you on that.
Mr. President,
Yes.
before we adjourn our meeting, please give the school committee an opportunity to adjourn their meeting.
Absolutely,
And then we'll adjourn right after.
absolutely. Go ahead.
Do I have a motion? Oops, sorry. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make motion to adjourn, Chair.
I have 9:44.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, chair votes aye. Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, if there are no more comments and no more concerns, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
We have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.